Welcome to Adventures in Modern Recording. I've been fortunate to be able to work with some of the greatest names in rock history like Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, Stones, Kiss, Anthrax, and many others. Along the way, I've seen many changes in the recording industry. In this program, you'll get an education in the art of making a record. When I started making records many years ago, the music business was not the sophisticated bean-counting giant that it is today. We could afford to experiment because studio time was much cheaper and there were fewer restrictions placed on the artist. Since experimentation is essential to the growth of any artist, setting up a project studio offers the necessary flexibility to develop your creativity. Recent innovations in console manufacturing, digital and MIDI technology have enabled us to construct a powerful recording facility for very little money. Having a project studio allows you to create demos, work out ideas, rehearse your songs at your own pace without being pressured. You'll be able to hone your technical skill at the console and ultimately have more control over the sounds that you create. There's equipment available at many different levels and prices that allow you to record your music at the precise moment when the inspiration strikes, like at midnight. Once your demos are perfected, it's time to come to a studio like this. Remember, one cannot substitute the acoustics and equipment of a professional recording studio. The producers and engineers that you will eventually work with have years of experience, and there's no substitute for that. During this program, I intend to show you some of the latest equipment now available, what it does, and how to get the best use out of it in your own studio. I'll be sharing with you many of the techniques and principles that I've used over the years, and you will see that the same principles apply no matter what level you're currently at or what equipment you have. In this first program, we'll get familiar with the equipment that is commonly used in music recording. We'll examine many different microphones, tape machines, consoles, outboard gear, and room acoustics. To assist me in this, a few of my friends in the business will share their expertise with you. Before we go into our project studio, I feel it's important that we take a look back at this amazing process called recording.
Advancements in recording equipment and techniques didn't initially come from large manufacturing companies or professional recording studios as one might believe, but rather were primarily inspired by the creative genius of one musician. While recording hit record after hit record in his home studio, recording artist and performer Les Paul pioneered sound experimentation and the innovations that are, to this day, the building blocks of modern recording.
We go back to 1946, and I'm playing at the Oriental Theater in Chicago, and Mom comes down to visit me. She drives down. Now, Mom is really a swinging gal because she died at 101 and a half. And that gal, let me tell you, she was driving her car down in Chicago in 46. So she came in and she comes backstage and says to me, "Lester, I heard you last night on the radio," and she says it was great. I said, "Mom, I've been doing 8 shows, 7 shows, whatever, at the Oriental Theater here." I says, "It wasn't me." And she says, "Well, if it wasn't you, you should do something about it." Because she says, whoever it was is copying you. I says, you can't copyright, you can't patent what I'm doing, Mom. And she said, "Well, you ought to do something about it." And so I thought about it a little bit. And Mom is pretty sharp, pretty sharp. So I went to Lou Levy, the manager of the Andrews Sisters, and said, "I'm going to give my notice. I'm going to leave the road tour." And Lou says, "What are you going to do?" And I says, "I'm going out to L.A., lock myself in the garage, and I'm not coming out until I got a sound that is so different that my mom can tell me from anybody else." So Mom is the one that caused me to leave the road tour to go out to California, and when Crosby and Rudy Valley and George Burns, when they called up Meredith Willson asking me to perform and do the radio shows, I turned them down. I says, "No, I'm busy working in my garage." Now, Crosby says, "What's the matter with you?" So he comes over to see what's going on. And I told him about my mom. I says, my mom is getting me mixed up with other players and everything. And I says, I'm just looking for something different. Little did I know what I'm going to do is make up something new and different with multi-track recording. Now there was one thing missing, and it played an important part. And I said, I want echo. And I don't want a room sound.
You don't want room reverberation?
I don't want room reverb at all. To put my mic in a hallway or in the bathroom was not what I wanted. So my friend Lloyd Rich and I, were arm wrestling at Santa Monica and Western in a little tavern, a little beer joint. And he pulled my arm down real easy, and he says, how come you're not concentrating on what we're doing? I said, I'm still thinking about that echo thing. And he says, you've been thinking about that 2 years now. And I says, well, it's still on my mind. I says, it'll come to me. He said, explain it to me once more. And I says, well, it would be like if you were in the Alps. I says, and you say, hello, 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 hello. That's what I want. Okay. Oh, he says, you mean like if you put a pickup head behind the record head? I says, my God, you hit it, Lloyd, you hit it. And we go over to the garage, into the studio, and we just take a head, a photograph cartridge, put it behind the record head, turn it up, and we go, hey, 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 and it was born. On the disc machine, what we did there is I wanted something else besides echo. I wanted a flanging. I wanted to phase the sound. So finally, I says, I got it. I got it. So I go out to the garage, and now you realize that I'm interested in all these unusual sounds, like the echo. Now we want a phase shift sound, in and out of phase. So what happens is very simple. I take and get an inductive motor and put a variac on it. Now I can set them so I make 2 copies of the same record and put one on one turntable, one on the other, and start them simultaneously at the same time. They're in phase. Then I took the variac and I would make it out of phase, in phase, and I'd get this thing shifting. And there was the sound, and I says, wow.
Let's talk about how you did sound on sound and how it, from that point of the sound on sound, you developed the idea for multi-track recording. That's what I very much
Okay. Well, in 1949, Bing says, got something for you. And it was at 1514 Curson, which is right on Bing's way home. And so Bing used to drop into my house a lot. And so this particular afternoon, Bing brings me out to his car, and he opens the trunk. And we were on for Kraft, and then we switched over to Philco. So I thought either he's going to unload a whole trunk of cheese, or I'm going to get a big, monstrous Philco radio, you know? So he says, wait till you see this. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. So one of the two, Philco or cheese. It was neither one of them. It was the Ampex tape machine.
One that's sitting over there.
It's right over there. And I bring it in the backyard. We bring it in. Bing and I, we bring it in the backyard, and we put it on a stool. And I have a picture of it. We took a picture right then and there of it. And it must have been there an hour. And I didn't tell Mary about it. I didn't say anything, except that I just played the tape machine, and I'm with the discs that I have, and I'm looking at this tape machine and everything. And the light lit so quick that I don't know. I just can't tell you why or how. But within an hour, I'd figure out how to make sound on sound. So I bring Mary out to the garage and I show it to her. And I says, now we can close the garage down and we can go with this machine. And when I alter this machine, now Mary's like my mother. Okay, Les, what are you going to do? And I says, well, I'm going to add a fourth head here, and I get involved technically in what I'm going to do. And so Mary says, but you don't know if it's going to work. Oh, I says, it'll work, it'll work, it'll work. Okay. And so we start booking dates immediately. We are now left out of the garage, and we now can go on the road and do anything we wish to do, if it works. So Mary and I drive all the way to Chicago, and on the way to Chicago with this tape machine, okay, I called Ampex before we left, and I says, I blew a head, can you send me another head? So they sent me the fourth head, and this head, I have to find somebody in Chicago. And all the way to Chicago, Mary's saying to me, but what if it doesn't work? I said, it'll work, it'll work. By the time we got to Chicago, I was beginning to wonder if it'll work or not, right? And so we're at the New Lawrence Hotel, and in comes from Ampex the head. And I look in the yellow pages, and I find a guy that'll drill a hole in it. And so I said, I want the hole right there.
In the deck.
In the deck. So the guy drills a hole. And after he drills a hole, I said, geez, we should have looked underneath. We probably drilled through half of the wiring. We missed everything. We didn't hit anything. We were the luckiest guys in the world. We hooked it up. And I says, 1, 2, 3, 4, testing. Howdy, 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 howdy. That's the second time now. See? Now to do that, I had to undo the fourth head and move it to the third head, from the third head to the fourth head. In those days, you have to move it back and forth, you know, which head you're going to be on to do the multi. And on comes 1, 2, 3, howdy, howdy, 1, 2, 3, 4, testing, howdy, howdy, and it works. And we're jumping up and down in the hallway, going to work at the Blue Note in Chicago, and the sound on sound was born right there.
Let me ask you a question about how you recorded. For instance, I know you did a lot of DI, direct injection, from the guitar through a transformer into the console, into a preamp, and then into the tape machine. But when you recorded with an amplifier, what about the mic placement?
I never used, I always direct.
You were always direct. Did you ever use a live mic at all for anything?
Never. No, I found that for what I was doing, I went directly in.
And you prefer the cleanliness of that sound?
And I went low impedance so that the guitar just goes right in.
Oh, you converted with a transformer from high to low?
No, I just wound the pickups that way.
Oh, you had low impedance pickups?
Oh, yeah. I'm always low impedance, you know.
There's the trick, right?
I left
there.
high from.
Because high.
That came about Eddie. Came about real easy. I just says, what does the phone company do? And I says, well, they can run long lines. They can do these things because they got their act together. They know what they're doing. And so what I did is I just took heed to what the other guy was doing. And everything, microphones, if you looked at a microphone, you don't see a high impedance mic, only in amateur land. And so consequently, I says, well, this has got to apply the same way. Every microphone that's of any good at all is low impedance. And so why shouldn't the guitar be low impedance? Now, I realized that the world out there was already stamped to high impedance. And that all these toys out there, all these guitars and everything plugged in high impedance, high impedance, high impedance. And so the world went. Now, I wasn't about to change the world. What I was to do is that I was going to do what I wanted to do for my application. And so I had only a 44BX mic for Mary, and I had 2 pair of earphones and this
Sound on sound machine.
yeah, paraphernalia that we carried around. With the 44 mic, I had to go in and modify the microphone because I wanted Mary to have lipstick on that mic. So Mary never was, Mary was like this on that mic all the time. In doing the sound on sound, the thing that was most important there is not to lose quality. And in figuring out how not to lose the fidelity and the clarity, the least amount of distortion, all that, what we decided was to do whatever part that was unimportant, do that first. And so in essence, what we did is make the recording backwards. And what we did is we would put the tracks on that we didn't care about, that were important, but they weren't going to be in focus.
They weren't going to be up front.
And it wouldn't be up front. And so the part that were most important were put on last. So with this happening, we were shooting How High the Moon and waiting for this moon to come around, and my manager walked up to me, and I was lying back in a beach chair, and I'm looking up at the moon, and he says, "Now what are you dreaming up?" Right? And I says, "Great, you wouldn't believe it." But I says, "You know what?" I says, "I just sitting here thinking, I know how to make a multi-track tape machine." And we knocked on Ampec's door, Ponyatoff, the whole thing. Lindsay was there, the whole bunch. And we had a big meeting. And they leaped on it. They leaped on it. And they say, yes, it can be done. And of course, that was where the tape machine was made. And that in 1956, we'd already built the console to marry to the tape machine. And where the tape machine had its own selector system, we had ours built in the console.
The cell sync.
The cell sync. Everything was remote from the console, so whatever we did, the tape machine took orders from us at the tape machine, so that the engineer, me being the engineer, could do all this stuff right here, hands-on.
Another point that I want to bring up that relates to 1993 is that in 1956, you were sitting there at your 56, 57, sitting there with your first 8-track machine in the world, operating it yourself very much in the same way that a person buying an ADAT or a DA88 digital machine can sit in his apartment or in his living room and do exactly the same thing, operated himself or herself.
Isn't that amazing?
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think the parallels are unbelievable.
If I was to stand today with that 8-track, if I held that in my hand, it would be like yay big, okay? Just hold it right there. And it does everything that this 7-foot job will do, right? And do what the console does also. So you have a console and you have a recording machine, a device that can stand on its head. And it can all be done, with the
flick of a switch.
Flick of a switch, yeah.
What advice would you give kids today who are recording enthusiasts?
The way I do it, the way I believe, is I never walk over to that machine till I know what I'm going to do. And I never use the machine to find it. I find it and then go to the machine and use it. I never let the machine tell me. I tell the machine what to do. In most cases, I may stumble across something in my ventures, but what I do is that I find that whether it's playing the guitar, whether it's how I'm going to deliver a line for the audience, whether it's in hooking up a piece of equipment or anything else, that you're much better off to figure out exactly what you're going to do and then go do it. Well, I think with the kid, he's got to do that. He should know if he's talented and then go for it. And now it takes the more you know, the better off you are. And of course, the more you know,
the less you know.
The less you know, yeah. Yeah, it comes with the dinner.
Thanks, Les.
Yeah.
Les, I want to thank you very, very much for letting us be in your home and in your studio
great.
in this wonderful place where history has been made and hopefully continues to be made.
I hope so.
I think kids of this new generation want to see what you've done, want to hear what you have to say. I think that without you having done what you've done, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and neither would thousands of other people be doing what they're doing.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I feel absolutely in awe, as I said, and once again,
Eddie,
thank you so much for
Thank
letting
you
us
so
be
much.
here. We're going to go to our project studio where you will see a continuation of the history of Les Paul. Welcome to our project studio. We got tons of great gear here. We're going to have a blast recording. It's all the latest stuff. And when we finish with this, you're going to know everything you need to know about recording in a home studio. Check it out. Our project studio has a console as a centerpiece, tape machines. In fact, we've got Tascam DA88s, 3 of them. They're digital 8 tracks. They lock up with this control device here. We have a MIDI station with Roland keyboards, tons of outboard gear for the keyboard itself, racks of outboard gear with equalizers, special sampling and processing gear, a couple of cassette decks, a Tascam digital machine, a Tascam 16-track analog machine, and, you know, this is really over the top. This is a lot of stuff. This is an elaborate project studio. But I'll tell you what, you could make a great sounding demo just with a small 4-track Porter studio, just like this, with 1 microphone. In fact, some of the greatest records of all time have been made just like that on a 4-track machine. The Beatles, Hendrix, Are You Experienced, the Stones, Beggar's Banquet. And in fact, talking about the Stones, I was fortunate enough to be on that session, and we recorded the basic track for Street Fighting Man on a Wallensack cassette deck, and then we played it back and re-recorded it on 1 track of a 4-track machine. Now, how about that for technology? So in today's project studios, groups like PM Dawn, they cut some of their basic tracks in their bedroom. So anything is possible. Apart from all this great gear that we have here, I'd like to discuss a very important aspect, and that is the acoustics and the environment in which you're going to be working. I'd like to introduce you to a very old friend of mine who is probably one of the world's best studio designers, 3-time Tech Award winner from Mix Magazine, designed studios like Electric Lady, home studios for Whitney Houston, Rick Rubin, Ace Frehley, studios like that. Dear friend, John Storyk. Hey, Johnny.
Eddie.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, mate.
I'm glad you could join us in our project studio. What do you think?
Pretty nice. Looks great. Everything's where it's supposed to be. Let's go to work.
See ya.
Okay. For 25 years, I've been designing recording studios, radio stations, video production facilities, and all kinds of related media facilities. Very exciting. The home studio, or project studio, as it's been known to be called over the last 10 years, is an exciting example of those kind of facilities. And we have here today an even more interesting example, because we're going to mix and produce in one section of the room and use another section of the room for microphone work. So it's got a number of idiosyncrasies to it. But before we're going to take a look at the surfaces and the treatments, we've got to do a little bit of fundamental review of acoustics itself. So let's discuss acoustics in general. What is sound? It's a form of energy caused by a variation or fluctuation of pressure in a medium. In this case, the medium is air. These energy fluctuations, these acoustical variations in pressure, are typically generated by speakers or instruments or people's voices, and typically received by microphones. Then they're transferred to electrical energy, where these responses can be altered or manipulated or stored. The changing of this acoustic energy to and from electric energy is accomplished by devices called transducers. Speakers are examples of transducers. In studio acoustics, we have 2 issues we have to deal with: transmission acoustics and internal room acoustics. Transmission acoustics have to do with everything responsible for making our room quiet. And I think it's pretty obvious why that's important. Internal room acoustics is a little bit more complex. That has to do with all the elements that we see on the surfaces of our rooms: diffusers, absorbers, the shape of the room, the size of the room. And basically, that has to do with guaranteeing that our recording sounds good in our microphone and our playback information is not colored or distorted so we can make good judgments. Now let's start to take a very specific look at our project studio. Here we are in a room that is 14 feet wide, 19 feet long, and 10 feet high. This particular studio is a combo format. In other words, this room is doubling as a control room and as a recording room. This causes certain complications when overdubbing, but I'm sure Eddie's going to discuss that later. Certainly we recognize that this room should be made as quiet as possible. But how quiet? Quiet enough not to disturb information being picked up on the microphones. Creating these quiet spaces can sometimes be tricky and can sometimes be expensive. But there are some tips. First of all, try and choose a space that's quiet to begin with, and one that doesn't have any noisy neighbors. The other, probably the most important tip for project studios has to do with windows and doors to your rooms, okay? Make sure they're sealed. Use acoustical caulking, use rubber gasketing, use prefabricated drop seals. There's quite a few things on the market, and they're not that complicated to install. Musicians in general like to listen to music in reverberant spaces. They kind of like to get a type of feedback from the music or the sound being played. But too much of this will color the sound and add or subtract different pieces of information on our tape. We have to be very careful of this when we're recording. How do we eliminate frequency-based coloration? How do we get the reverberation in our room to sound just about right? How do we prevent harsh reflections from bouncing around certain surfaces and disturbing us? Let's take a look at some issues that we have to deal with. One of the first things we can do is essentially eliminate the room. Sounds a little bit strange, but essentially that's what near-field monitoring does. What is near-field monitoring? Basically, monitors that are close to the listening position, near field. These monitors and their proximity to our ear basically eliminate most of the room during the playback mode of recording. Even still, we still have another concept to deal with, and that has to do with initial time delay gap. The near-field monitors will issue a direct sound wave, which will come right to my ear. However, there'll be some secondary sound that also comes out of the speaker, bounces off the console, and comes back up to my ear. This secondary sound, traveling at the same speed as the primary sound, will arrive a little bit later. That difference in time is what's called the initial time delay gap, and it has to be just right, or else we'll lose such things as stereo focusing and a kind of clarity or crispness of the sound. A good tip is to actually take your near fields and push them back 1 or 2 feet, as we've done here. Generally speaking, unless the ratios of a room are well designed, it's advisable to introduce low-frequency absorption. We can do this with low-frequency traps, Helmholtz resonators, deep absorbers, and other kinds of devices, as you can see in the photos. Now we're going to talk about the treatments. The first set of treatments I want to discuss are in the front of the room. They're the most important ones, and if you have to put one treatment in one place in your room, these are the ones you want to do. These are mid and high frequency absorbers. They're the ones that stop the most disastrous bouncing rays that will introduce colored sound to you. The light colored ones are actually fabric wrapped over 5 to 6 pound density fiberglass. There are a number of companies that make them. This particular company is one called ArcRep. They run anywhere from $50 to $100 a piece, and they're extremely effective. They can be glued on the wall or stick clipped on the wall. Sometimes if you hold them off the wall 3 or 4 inches, they'll increase the low frequency absorption, and that's not a bad trick. The second type of mid-high frequency absorber that we're using in the front of our room is these black pyramidal panels, and they're made by Sonics, very popular in studios. They're a little less expensive, and they don't quite come in as many colors and varieties of fabric, but they essentially do the same thing. And we're showing that in the front for variety. Let's take a look at some more treatments in the room. These 2 guitars, they're really not acoustic, but they look good anyway. What are these? These are diffusers. When sound approaches any type of boundary, one or more of 3 things will happen. We can absorb sound, or suck it in. We could reflect sound, which is simply bouncing off the wall and returning into the room. Or we could diffuse sound. Diffusion is a type of reflection. These diffusers actually scatter the sound or re-radiate the sound back into the room. These wells are carefully designed to do that. There are other types of diffusers. Here are examples of RPG diffusers, and here's another kind. These are made by Systems Development Group. These are called ART fusers, and these are 734s. These are a little more expensive, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, usually made out of wood. The ART diffusers are a little less expensive, and they also are made out of wood, but here we have a very inexpensive model made out of styrofoam, so a lot of this has to do with your personality in a studio. It's an interesting thing about closet doors and other kinds of doors in a room. We can also put a soft absorbing material on one side, okay? And in the case of this door, although it swings the other way, this door actually swings out, and we could have a hard surface on one side and a soft surface on the other, so we could kind of use doors to give us a kind of a variable acoustic situation in our room. We could also literally put hinged panels on a room with two kinds of treatments on either side of them, and you see that in the photo right now. In our studio, we've elected to carpet the entire studio floor. Generally speaking, in smaller rooms with low ceilings, this is advisable. Although if the room has a higher than average ceiling, you might elect to put a different kind of surface like wood or tile. Most project studios will have ceilings that are 10 feet or lower. Again, a variety of treatments can be used on ceilings, although they take a little bit more experience to design and implement. Take a look at some of these photos. We spent some time reviewing acoustic principles and some very specific treatments in our project studio. Don't forget acoustics, it's very important. Everything on these walls, and including our carpet, has actually cost less than $5,000. We could have also very effectively treated this room for as little as $3,000. Acoustics are very important. It's the first step in a good recording. Good luck.
The first element in the recording chain is the microphone. And as you can see here, I'm surrounded by a forest of different types of microphones, condensers here, and dynamics over here.
They work differently and so are going to be good for different situations. With dynamic mics, a coil of wire is attached to the rear of the diaphragm and suspended in a magnetic field. When a sound causes the diaphragm to move, so does the coil, and this creates the electrical signal. Dynamic mics are rugged and relatively inexpensive, and they don't distort very easily, which makes them the ideal choice for bass drums and loud guitar amps. The condenser microphone uses two electrically charged plates, one of which is the diaphragm. When the diaphragm moves in response to a sound, the distance between the plates varies, resulting in an electrical signal. Condenser mics need a power supply to charge the plates and to boost the very low electrical signal. Most contemporary consoles have a built-in 48-volt DC phantom power supply, although some condenser mics will allow you to use batteries. Condenser mics are more sensitive than dynamics and will distort if presented with very high volumes. This sensitivity gives them better high frequency and transient response than dynamics, which is important for recording instruments like acoustic guitars, pianos, strings, or cymbals.
Here we have a wide variety of dynamic microphones, starting with this Beta 57 by Shure, a Shure SM7, Sennheiser 441, the famous 57 Shure microphone, which is the standard workhorse of the industry, and the Sennheiser 421, great tom-tom mic, and this is the Shure Beta 58. Down here we have a very unique dynamic microphone, looks like a bit of a spaceship from the 50s. This is the new D112 by AKG. I use this on bass drum an awful lot. Very good, very tough mic, and virtually indestructible, and you can't destroy it. I'd like to talk about condenser microphones. The two that's standing right here in front of me, this is the TLM-170 by Neumann, a really expensive, beautiful microphone, great for vocals, sax, strings, very expensive, mostly used in professional studios. An AKG C3000 condenser, a beautiful mic, great for strings and horns, vocals, and a very well-known microphone, the AKG CK414. Great vocal mic, great acoustic guitar mic with a pop shield. This is a Neumann SM69. It's a rather phallic-looking object, but it has a revolving capsule. There are two microphones in here, and it's used in stereophonic recording. It has MS and XY. I'll explain that later. This is the famous Neumann U87, a ubiquitous mic. I use this all the time in the studio. It's probably one of the most used condensers in the studio. Use it on drums, use it on vocals, room mics. More about that later. Over here we have a relatively inexpensive AKG condenser microphone. It's called the CK91. We'll be using this later in our program, Recording Acoustic Guitar. Very bright mic, very good mic, a lot of presence, and certainly quite affordable for a project studio. Same here with this Sennheiser. This is the MKH40. It's a relatively inexpensive condenser microphone. Very good for a project studio. I want to talk to you about esoteric microphones like this thing here in my hand. It's one of these make my day type mics. Good for pointing way out in the distance and picking up people's conversation, if you know what I mean. And over here, we have a PZM microphone made by Neumann. Pressure zone microphone. I use it sometimes in the studio, sticking it to the inside lid of a piano. Gives you a nice big overall sound. It's omnidirectional, which means picking up from everywhere. I also sometimes do it by sticking it on the glass of the control room window so I can pick up the whole band. Kind of a neat trick. I'd like to talk about another kind of esoteric microphone. It's called the ribbon microphone. Not really room for it here in the project studio because they're very delicate mics, like the M160 Bayer or the RCA 77DX that you see on the David Letterman show every night. It's a very delicate microphone. If you put it in front of a bass amp or a bass drum, you'll blow the ribbon, and it's terribly expensive to replace, mostly for professionals. I use them in the studio an awful lot. Another type of esoteric microphone that I use is called the tube condenser. Extremely expensive. I'm going to use it at Fantasy Studios when we record the drums live, and you'll see that in action. Besides microphones, there's yet another way that you can pick up sound. As in this acoustic guitar over here, it has a pickup built in underneath the bridge. And with a little preamplifier, we can run out of here through this wire into a DI box. Now, in this bass guitar, we have high impedance pickups. Same thing as in that guitar. And virtually any electric guitar has high impedance pickups. And you want to convert that high impedance to low impedance so that it will match into your console. And we come out of this bass guitar through a wire into this DI box right here where it says instrument. The other half goes into your amplifier where it says amplifier. On the back of it, where it says mic output, it feeds into the console. Now, the reason for this is that sometimes you want to get a very direct present sound on a bass or an acoustic guitar and mix it in with other microphones. Sometimes it's useful if you're in your little project studio and you can't turn up the amp, you can run the bass DI straight into the console with a little bit of compression. It makes a great sound. Now that we've dealt with DI, let's see what we can do with an amplifier. We have our ubiquitous clothes closet, which becomes a great isolation booth. And in it, we have a small amplifier with two dynamic microphones, very reasonably priced. A Shure SM57 and a Sennheiser 421. Close mic'd. Reason being, each microphone has a totally different sound. And if you place the microphones carefully, one in the center of the speaker and one slightly off the center of the speaker, you're going to get a great guitar sound at your console without too much EQ. Richard, who plays with Chaka Khan and with Etta James, a magnificent sax man, he's going to play some sounds for us, and we're going to get some cool sounds at the console. The trick here is to get a great sax sound with either an inexpensive microphone or a very expensive microphone, or, if you're really smart, combination of two mics. The answer to getting a good sound is in the positioning of the microphone. Now, Richard, could you just play me a few more bars and we'll demonstrate the difference between the 57, its sound is like this. And the same thing again, please, Richard. What you can hear immediately is there is a big difference in the quality of the tone. The 87, of course, being a fairly expensive condenser mic, is capturing the whole frequency range from the very, very top to the very, very bottom. The 57, although a decent microphone, doesn't have that kind of frequency response, and it sounds pinched, and it sounds just a little too skinny. So what I do is I use the characteristics of the 57, which is a kind of a skinny sounding mic, and the full and fatness of the 87, combine the two of them together, and what we get is this. Okay, Richard. Thank you, Richard. If you're recording a live instrument in your project studio, like Richard here with the sax, and you have your monitors cranked up, you're going to completely change your sound. Now, that may be something that's desirable, but some people like it, some people don't. So the alternative is put the headphones on, turn the monitor speakers down so you won't get any feedback. Okay, Richard, let's try it again. I'd like to talk about microphone patterns. This 87, very expensive condenser mic, has 3 positions: cardioid, figure of 8, and omnidirectional. Now, Richard's going to play, and I'm going to position the microphone on the soprano, and he's going to walk around to the back of the microphone so you can get an idea of what cardioid really means. Cardio means it's live in the front and dead in the back. Thank you, Richard. We're going to switch this now to figure of 8. Now, what that means is literally this microphone is live in a figure of 8 shape like this. The sides will be dead, back and front will be live. And Richard's going to walk around and we'll hear what happens. Now, I hope we all got the feeling that when he went to the sides, it was dead, and when it went to the front and back, we heard him. Very useful for you putting 2 horn players, a sax player playing tenor and another player playing soprano like Richard does. Now, make sure that your fader's down so you don't get your bang on your monitor, and we're going to switch this to Omni. Like that. I'm going to put the microphone like so, and Richard's going to do another dance around the mic, and it should be exactly the same wherever he goes. You know that that is exactly the same all the way around. That's Omni. That means it's alive all the way around. As you can see, what we've been doing with Richard on this beautiful condenser microphone, getting these great sounds, you're going to need something of decent quality. You maybe don't have to go quite to this extent. You can do it with dynamics and get a good selection, because they're all going to sound different, whether it's an MD421 or whether it's a Shure. You can use those microphones. You can use them on amps. You can use them on bass drums. You can use them on snares. You may have to work a little harder to get a great sound, but dynamic microphones are the basis of your project studio. Now, Richard, play us out, please.
Yes.
The console is the centerpiece of your project studio, and we have a huge variety of boards, consoles, desks. And we use the word desk in England because it looks like a desk. But here in America, we call them boards. So on my left, we have a Tascam Porta Studio with a cassette machine in it, built-in recorder. We'll talk more about that later. A little Mackie 12-in, 2-out console. A Yamaha multi-track cassette recorder. Another Mackie board, 16-in, 2-out, and a Tascam 8-output, 24-input console. we have a Mackie 24 input console, 8 bus out. It's a very compact board. They crammed an awful lot of stuff into a very small space. It's an amazing board. And it's quite unlike the consoles that I normally use, which are usually about 6 or 7 feet long. But basically, every strip is the same on this console. If you learn one, you've got them all. And I'm going to try and show you the function of an entire strip, all the way down from the mic line position, to the mic trims, to the auxiliaries, the EQ section, the pan controls, the level controls, and the faders, and the bus assignments. Basically a very simple concept.
First, there is the input section that will accept both microphones and line level devices. This switch indicates whether it is mic or line. In this case, we want it in the mic position. The signal then goes to a mic preamp, which increases the low voltage of the mic to a voltage which is high enough to be used by the console. Now, to set our input level, first we want to put the fader at unity gain or 0, which is where the fader is most efficient. Now we turn up the gain until we are getting a healthy signal level, which would be around 0 on the meters.
On channel 15, in the line position, as you can see is different from the mic position on 16, the button is pushed down in line. I have an organ plugged into this channel.
This control now becomes a line trim. Again, set the level by putting the fader at the unity position and adjust the trim to get a good signal level. Next, the signal goes to the EQ section. The complexity of the EQ section differs from console to console, but basically it allows you to alter the volume of specific frequencies. Some consoles will just have bass and treble controls, but on most modern consoles like this one, you also have the ability to sweep through a whole range of frequencies and have even more flexibility. This console has 4 bands, and this button switches the EQ section in and out.
And by me talking into this microphone here and pushing this fader up to the unity gain position, starting with the top, we have a high mid control. And if we alter the frequency like this, you can hear the difference. As I talk, you can hear me sweep through the frequencies until I become quite obnoxious with a high amount of ring and boost, around about 5K to my voice. The next section is the low mids. If I boost the low mids, you can hear me sound really boomy because I'm boosting at 250 cycles. If I now turn the knob to the left, I am now cutting out 250 cycles from my voice. And the next section of the equalizer is this high frequency 12K boost, which makes it sound very glassy and very thin. On this console, the lower 2 frequencies here, the high band and the low band, are fixed, one at 12K and one at 80 Hertz.
They are also shelving, which is very common on the high and low bands of many consoles. What this means is that the frequencies from 12kC all the way up will be affected, and as you can see on the graph, it looks like a shelf. On the lows, all frequencies below 80 Hz will be affected. The high mid and low mid bands are not shelving but have a bell-shaped curve. The frequency slightly below and above the selected frequency, say 1kC, will be affected, but to a lesser degree.
On the mid frequencies here on this console, it starts at 500 cycles and sweeps all the way up to 18K. So you got to be really careful of what frequency you pick. You don't want to start to put like 20 dB of boost at 18K. It will sound pretty horrible. Be careful and selective with your frequencies. Do not over EQ. The answer is not in the EQ. The answer is in your miking technique.
Each channel of the console also has some auxiliary sends which allow the signal to be sent to the headphones or any processing gear like reverbs, delays, or whatever. This console has 4 sends per channel. We are going to connect the output of auxiliary 1 to the input of our effects unit, and then the output of the effects unit back to the console, either at the line inputs of 2 channels like we have, or you could connect it to the auxiliary returns, which are just very basic line inputs.
If I turn up just number 1, we will get, on the return, some echo. Echo!
The pre-switch tells the signal to go to the auxiliary send before it goes to the fader. When the switch is out or in post, the level of the signal going to the auxiliary send depends on the level of the fader.
Pre-switch on an auxiliary enables you to get a sound that sounds distant. If you pull this fader up, listen to the organ, and pull the returns up, you can hear the echo. Now I'm going to pull this fader down with the organ on it, and the sound is still there, mysteriously in the background. That is pre, meaning it's before the fader. This pre-switch is before this main fader. That's an organ sound, very dry, no echo at all. In the post position on your auxiliary send, if you pull up the returns, you're going to hear echo. If I pull this main fader down, everything disappears, which means that the signal is after this fader.
Now that we've got the signal into the console and EQ'd it, and we've seen how to send it through the auxiliary sends, we need to deal with sending the signal to the tape machine. The fader controls the volume going from that channel to whatever output bus you assign it to.
On this console, and on any other console that you want to record on, the input strip can be assigned to any bus. Since this console has 8 buses, 1 through 8, and these little buttons here can allow you to assign this fader to any one of these 8 buses. They control the level going to tape. With this pan part, I can adjust the level from bus number 1, which is on the left-hand side, to bus number 2, which is on the right-hand side. As this bus switch shows 1 to 2, you can also pan between the two, and you'll get it going to both tracks. Adjusting your level so, should be able to make it feel like it's even. On this console, we have 24 inputs, and we can make these 24 inputs go to any one of 8 tracks. Now let's just say, for instance, I want to send all 24 to track number 1. I push this little button in all the way across the console, and all 24 are going to track number 1. That's if we want to put 24 strings on track 1, or 24 vocals on track 1, or 24 kick drums on track 1.
Just because the board has 8 output buses, it doesn't mean we can only record 8 tracks. On this console, the output of bus 1 is also connected to the input of tracks 9 and 17 on the tape machine. And bus 2 also goes to tracks 10 and 18 of the tape machine. The same thing applies to all the other buses. This console also has a direct out on each channel, which you can connect directly to any track on the tape machine.
Most consoles have on and off buttons or mute buttons to enable you to switch things on and off, like this. That's off, that's off, that's off. And it'll light up and show you that that channel is muted. The solo buttons are a different function altogether. Let's say you're in the middle of a mix and you have 14 or 15 things going and you want to solo one individual instrument. You can hit the solo button, like so, which solos it in the monitors. And take it off. If you need to mute this for any reason, hit the mute button. Kills the channel completely.
This is the monitor section, called Mix B on this console. The sounds we send to the tape machine come back here so we can set the volume and panning of the various instruments. During recording, we set the level going to tape at the fader and our listening level at the monitor pot, which doesn't affect the level going to tape at all. Well, that just about does it for the basic features of the input strip. There are also a few things over on the other side of the console that I would like to show you now. This console has 2 headphone outputs, and you set the overall level of the phones here. You can also solo it to hear on the monitors exactly what's going to the phones. They are both identical. Again, the level set. Another solo. You see the flashing light indicating that something is soloed. You can select what will feed the phones, either the stereo mix you're listening to in the monitors, or this switch sends auxiliaries 3 and 4 to the headphones. You can select other auxiliary sends or even use an external source like a cassette machine. The monitor here controls what you hear on the speakers. This board is set up for 2 sets of speakers, and you can control their volumes independently over here. Again, you can select what you listen to, either the stereo mix or mix B on this board, which is the monitor mix. You can also listen to the mixdown deck or another source like a cassette, and you can listen to any of these in mono.
We've really come an awful long way in the recording business. Years ago, we had limited number of tracks, limited number of inputs. This console is amazing, 24 inputs. I mean, for the average project studio, it's really quite a lot of inputs, but it's always best to have more inputs than not, because you're going to be expanding your musical career, and it's better to have more than less. Years ago, when I was recording Jimi Hendrix, we only had 4 tracks and a limited number of inputs. By clever bouncing, and I'll show you that in a later program, we were able to make great records. Just remember, when you're out there in the real world buying a board at your local music store, pick something that A, that you can afford, and B, that sounds really great, because you're going to be spending a lot of time behind that console. And remember that you're making music out of this project studio. That's the most important thing. The start of any great record is in rehearsal. I've been rehearsing with this band called Wolfhouse, and we're going to go over there and we're going to show you how we put this record together.
Rain comes down and falls right through. So far away from you. So far away. Why? I play with fire.
It's great. I mean, it feels good. It feels like the intro is a bit on the long side. And then possibly the first verse also sounds like it could be chopped a little bit. What can you do in terms of the structure on the intro? Can we sort of cut it back by about 4 bars or something?
Cut it in half.
In half? Oh, that feels painful. Oh, dear.
How's that?
I'm thinking the same exact thing. You must have read my mind.
Okay.
All right. So I was thinking about this B section. Maybe we could try a bit of keyboard in there, like a Hammond organ, or maybe even, I think I can come up with a really scary mellotron patch that if we sunk it in the background so it didn't interfere. The fact of the matter is you're a 3-piece band, and I don't want to sort of interfere too much with that. But if we were very clever with it, we could get some sort of either a Hammond organ or maybe a sort of mellotron-y kind of weird sound. The descending sequence, just playing like in octaves. That's one thing.
Just
and the
subtly in the back.
Very subtly,
Okay.
very subtly. And the other thing was maybe some oohs or ahs in the C section to lead into the chorus. I don't want anything in the chorus because, I mean, your performance is so strong there anyway. I don't want to touch that. But just sort of like a little pad into the chorus itself. Could be good. We could try it.
That would be fantastic.
You're so insincere, I hate you. Yeah, let's try that.
Okay.
Calling out in the night, I'm going wild, going wild. Fill my veins, fill my lungs, and see how they run. Say I'm tired, but it's a long way down, a long way down to the sky. I'm floating around. Rain comes down and falls right through. So far away from you.
Well, that song sounds like it's coming together. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to Mick Guzauski, and he is going to talk about
analog and digital tape machines, processing gear and effects devices, as well as the digital audio workstation. Mick's engineering on albums by Quincy Jones, Mariah Carey, Hart and Michael Bolton, to name just a few, has not only resulted in multi-platinum hits, but has established him as one of the world's most preeminent mixing engineers. It's a great pleasure to welcome Mick Guzauski.
I'm going to talk about the storage of sound on tape in the studio. There's two different technologies used, analog and digital. I want to touch a little bit on each one. The way tape operates is that tape is a thin ribbon of plastic covered with very, very fine iron particles. These iron particles can be magnetized. They're magnetized by a device in the tape machine called the tape head. Tape head in its simplest form is an electromagnet. When we record on a tape machine, the audio, the electrical impulses that are the audio that come out of the mixing console get processed and go into this head, and the head magnetizes the tape as the tape passes the head. When we play the tape back, rewind it and play it back, the head, the same head, is producing an electrical signal proportional to the magnetism on tape. This particular machine is a multi-track machine, meaning that it has more than one audio track. More than one track can be recorded simultaneously on this machine. This particular machine is a 16-track machine, meaning that there's 16 magnetic paths on this tape. If you looked underneath this head here, you would see 16 very narrow stripes, each corresponding to a track. The tracks are recorded side by side on this piece of tape. By the way, you would never really handle a piece of tape by touching the oxide side of it like that. That's a bad practice, but just to show you the head of the machine. Suppose you recorded a drummer and a bass player on this tape machine. Say you recorded the drummer's bass drum here, snare drum here. The rest of his drums is a stereo mix on 3 and 4, and recorded a bass player on track 5, a guitar player on track 6, and then later on you wanted to add a vocal. You could take tracks 1 through 6 out of record, put track 7 into record. Tracks 1 through 6 would be, this head would operate as a playback head now. Tracks 1 through 6 would be playing back, and you could hear them, and a vocalist could hear them, and track 7 would be in record and magnetizing the tape. So you would record the vocalist on track 7 in sync. It's what we call cell sync, because the record point is synchronous with the playback point of the machine. And when you play the whole thing back, you would have the drums, bass, and guitar, and vocal all in synchronization. You could continue that till you filled up 16 tracks, till you finished your production. Let's take a look at some of the basic controls that are on pretty much every multi-track tape machine. These are the transport controls here. This is pretty much on every tape machine, from a cassette machine on up to the most sophisticated studio machine. Stop, of course, is stops all motion. Fast forward is a fast rewind in the forward direction to go ahead on the tape. Rewind to go back. Play engages the machine at play speed. Usually pressing play and record together will put the machine into record if a track is enabled to record. These buttons here do that. These determine whether a track is going to play back or is going to go into record when you press record. If that red light is flashing, the track's in ready. As soon as you hit record while holding play, notice the light goes on solid. You're recording on that track. When you hit play again, it drops out of record. This is so if you're recording a performance, a vocalist or a musician on this track, and suppose the performance was great and there was a mistake of one note, you could go back to that part of the song, play back. The musician could play or sing along, and when you come to the part you want to fix, you go into record and out of record. That's known as punching in and out, and you can fix performances like that. You don't have to retake a whole take if it's almost perfect and you just need to fix one thing. Most analog tape machines give you a choice of speed that says low and high speed. In the case of this machine, it's 7.5 and 15 IPS. A lot of professional machines give you the choice between 15 and 30 IPS. IPS is inches per second. Also, most professional machines, analog or digital, have varispeed. When you enable the varispeed, you can adjust the speed in very, very precise increments around the preset speed. This is so you can just tune the tape slightly sharp or flat if you're overdubbing an instrument that might be slightly out of tune with your track, or if you're mixing a record and you want a slightly higher tempo, slightly faster tempo, you can turn the speed up. You could also do it for special effects if you wanted to if you wanted to record at a higher speed and then bring the speed down, or record at a lower speed if you're recording a singer out of their range. There's a lot of uses for that. It gives you about a 10-15% variation on speed. The higher speed will give you slightly less noise, a little more headroom, which is the amount of level you have above the noise floor, the amount of usable level you have before the tape distorts. It does this, though, at the expense of low-frequency response. So depending on really what type of music you're recording and what kind of sound you want, that should govern your tape speed selection. I'd say if you're recording rock and roll, really wanting a heavy drum and bass sound, I'd say 15 inches per second would be better on analog. You'd get your low-frequency response of the machine would be better, and also the fact that you don't have as much headroom would cause the tape to compress some of the really high-energy, high-frequency sounds and just give you more of a, more ballsy sound. I'd like to mention about noise reduction on analog tape. Noise reduction, either Dolby or DBX, is available internally on this machine. It's available externally to a lot of machines. What it does, it reduces noise or tape hiss at low levels by increasing the high-frequency, low-level information that's recorded on the tape and then decreasing it when you play back. It does this mostly at low levels, so when you record louder on the tape, the noise reduction has less of an effect, and you don't overload the tape with high frequencies at a higher level. The net effect is to give you much, much less noise. It's particularly important on a machine like this that's running at a fairly low speed with fairly narrow tape. If you were to record an acoustic project or something very subtle with a lot of low-level information, you'd want to use it. Of course, any kind of noise reduction or processing isn't free. You definitely you can lose a little bit of the clarity, a little bit of the immediacy of the sound, but I feel that the reduction in noise really far outweighs any loss of quality. That's really it for analog multitrack for me now. What you see here is a very new technology available. These are 8-track digital recorders. It's a modular system, so you could start with 8 tracks. You could build to as many as 128 tracks. Here you see 3 machines synced for 24 tracks. The top machine is acting as a master. The bottom 2 machines are slaves. There's a control track and a time code on the tape that tells the machine precisely the position that the tape is in within 1/48,000th of a second. This machine is playing back, and these machines are looking at their control track and adjusting their position that they're running at the exact same point in time on their tapes as the master machine is. So in essence, these 3 machines are running together as one 24-track machine. This is a remote control for these 8-track digital machines. This particular remote will control up to 6 machines or 48 tracks. You can see the record enable buttons here, the same as on our analog 16-track. The transport control buttons, the same as on our analog 16-track. We also see a keypad and 2 numeric display windows here. This is an auto locator. Let's say that 0 is the beginning of our tape, and we've recorded a song that starts at 20 seconds. We could enter 20 seconds into the auto locator and store it in a position, register 1. The top display shows the current position of the tape. The bottom display shows the locate position, where the tape will go to when you press locate, in position 1. If the first verse of the song starts at, say, 45 seconds, we can put 45 seconds in the bottom display and store it in register 2, and so on. We can store up to 99 registers of information in this locator. We're at the first verse now. We want to go back to the top, so recall 1, hit locate, and while we're locating, we could make changes in our setting on the console, or do anything else that needs to be done. These particular machines use standard high-8 videotape for 100 minutes of recording. Same tape as you'd use in a camcorder. Other manufacturers have similar machines out that use Super VHS tape. But they all seem to be a very reliable, very, very good sounding format. Their sonic quality is pretty close to the high-end professional digital machines you see in professional studios. Cost is really quite a bit less. We're talking $3,000 to $4,000 per machine here. A 48-channel high-end professional digital machine is about $200,000. So we're talking about $180,000 difference on 48 tracks. This puts these really in the realm of a high-end project studio and really gives the musician and engineer a really nice tool to work with. Suppose we have everything recorded, our 16 tracks here or our 24 tracks on digital, everything's separate, everything's raw information there, and we have to mix it down now. We have to create a final stereo product that can be mastered into a CD or played on the radio or distributed in cassette or any form we want. So let's look at some mix-down machines. Here we have a 2-track quarter-inch machine, which is the same as an analog multi-track, but it records 2 tracks simultaneously. We also have in the digital world here a DAT machine. DAT is a digital audio tape. It's a little tape cartridge, smaller than a cassette. It's very similar to a miniature videotape cartridge, that it has a rotary head like a video machine, and it records digital information on tape. I want to talk also a little bit about editing. Once you've got your once you have your final product mixed to here, say you have 4 songs mixed on this reel of tape, and you want to shorten some, you want to take sections out of songs, you want to change the order, say you want the 3rd song first, the 1st song second. What we do in a machine like this is edit it. You can hear the music as you're playing the tape, and if you want to find a specific point, you can rock the tape back and forth. It's still moving over the heads, so you hear it. You can mark your precise spot against the head, and you can physically cut the tape, put it on another reel, change the position, and splice it together. Now, how are you going to do that with this little guy? Suppose you have a DAT which can hold up to 2 hours here, and you have a bunch of stuff, and you don't want it all, and you want it all in a certain order, and you're not going to cut that thing up. Here we have a fairly new technology that solves it. This is a Pro Tools digital audio workstation. It's a digital recorder that, instead of recording to magnetic tape, records to a magnetic disc in this computer. We see a graphic representation of the waveform of our program here, and we can mark any region of the program and edit it any way we want. If we're looking at the introduction of our song is here, we have our first verse here, our chorus here. If we wanted to cut this song up and say we wanted to double the intro, we could move that down there, and we could, with the computer, just double it up, and there we have 2 intros. And then we could go into our first verse, just move that down there, and then our chorus. If we wanted a double chorus, we could do that. If we wanted to hear how another intro would sound between the verse and the chorus, we could try that. We could try any arrangement idea, anything. This is known as non-destructive editing, meaning we haven't changed the original recording. That's still here intact forever, and we can try as many different arrangements and as many different sequences as we want. If you're editing with tape, with analog tape, that's destructive editing because you're physically cutting the tape, and you could put it back together, but if you have a lot of little pieces, it's a pretty difficult thing. With this, you can just shuffle these sections around. This works because the hard disk in a computer can access any information very fast within just a few 1,000ths of a second. It can find exactly where it's supposed to play from, and all we're really moving around is pointers to the recording here. The actual recording never changes. When we're satisfied with our edit and how we've put our music together, we can transfer digitally back to the DAT machine, and with no generation loss, since we've stayed in the digital domain the whole time. We've just looked at the high end of the spectrum of Project Studio equipment, digital machines, Pro Tools. Over here we have the opposite end of the spectrum. This is a little Tascam Porta Studio. It can do a good job of 4-track recording for only a few $100s. Perfectly adequate for a lot of songwriting demos, and also just to get the hang of and get the feel of doing multi-track recording. It uses a regular analog cassette, has a built-in 4-channel mixer with an effects send and EQ, and you can use this mixer to mix this down to an external cassette machine, a 2-track cassette machine later. I'm going to talk now a little bit about signal processing, or the modification of the audio while it's being recorded or after it's being recorded. We have a great advantage in multi-track recording, since every instrument's recorded on a separate track that we talked about before, that we can modify the sounds after it's been recorded and not at the expense of the time of the musicians and the performance. First type of processing I'd like to talk about is EQ. That's equalization, or the changing of the relative proportions of the frequency spectrum, the high end, mid-range, and low end of the sound that we're working with. I'd like to demonstrate a little bit with the equalizer on the console here. I'll play this guitar track, and we can hear how this equalizer will As I control the low frequencies, it'll boost the bottom end, boost the low frequencies, or cut the low frequencies back. High frequency control. The mid-frequency control The mid-frequency band of this equalizer is what's known as a parametric equalizer. In a parametric equalizer, you can control not only the amount of boost and cut, but you can control the center frequency, or the frequency that the equalizer has most of its action at, and the bandwidth, how much frequencies around the center frequency are affected. As I boost this, you can hear the change of center frequency, the change of where the equalizer has its most activity. As I control the bandwidth, you can hear it now affect a wider portion of the spectrum, or a narrower portion of the spectrum. Keep in mind that this also works cutting out frequencies and not only boosting them. With an equalizer like this, you can carve the spectrum of each instrument to fit with other instruments and make the mix much clearer. These are very versatile equalizers built right into the console here. But I'd like to show you also about outboard EQ. Here's a couple examples here. This is a graphic equalizer, third octave graphic equalizer. It splits the audio spectrum into 31 bands, from the lowest frequency, 20 hertz, to the highest frequency, 20 kilohertz. And you can adjust the relative level of each of these 31 bands with these slider controls here. An equalizer like this would be used more for tuning the speakers to a room, where you would measure the frequency response of a room, of your speaker system in a room, and use an equalizer like this to flatten the response to compensate for any room problems. Down here we have a parametric equalizer that has a graphic display. You can actually see, as I boost the mid-frequencies here, the level of that band of frequencies come up or down. I can adjust, I can switch to adjust the bandwidth, and I can adjust the center frequency. It gives me a graphic representation of that. Also, you can store your EQ curves in memory. An equalizer like this probably wouldn't be found in a Project Studio because it's really an expensive device, but it's here because it looks really cool. So next, I'd like to talk about dynamic processing. These are devices which change the gain of the signal path in relation to, or inverse relation to, the level of the audio coming in. Gates, compressors, and to an extent de-essers do this. I'll play this vocal track now and demonstrate.
So far away, wild.
As you can hear, there's noise and headphone leakage between lines of the vocal track. I can use a noise gate to get rid of that.
Fire. Play with fire.
The threshold control of the gate controls the level at which the gate turns on. The gate will turn off below the threshold point, turn on above the threshold point. So any sound in the tape below minus 35 dB, the gate will shut off. So it'll shut off on the noise between lines, but turn on when the singer's singing. This can also be used on a live drum kit to get rid of hi-hat leakage into the snare mic or overhead leakage into the kick. Or it can be used on any instrument where there's a noise level that's lower than the actual signal level, but that you want to get rid of it. Hold is how long the gate will stay on after it drops back below threshold, and release is how long it'll take to taper off after the signal drops below threshold. A compressor decreases the gain of the signal path in proportion to the level coming in. What this does is it flattens out or restricts the dynamic range slightly, and is useful for example, to mix the vocal into a track where the track is at a fairly consistent level and the vocal level changes. It's useful on a vocal in this case because the instrumentation, the band tracks of this are at a pretty consistent level. The vocalist is singing sometimes soft, sometimes loud, and we want him to be in proportion to the band, always a little above the band or in a certain place in the mix of the band. We can use a compressor to restrict his dynamic range to what the dynamic range of the other tracks are. The controls in this compressor are, there's a bypass switch to switch the unit in and out of the circuit. Threshold is the level above which compression starts. Ratio is the ratio of the input to the output signal after compression. Suppose you had a threshold of 0 dB and a compression ratio of 2 to 1. What would happen then is the compressor would have no effect at levels less than 0 dB. At 0 and above, there's a 2 to 1 compression factor, so if you put a level of +5 into the compressor, it would come out at +2.5. If you put a level of +10 into the compressor, it would come out at +5. Peak stop level is how many dB above 0 dB that it will limit. The output gain is just the volume level out of the compressor. It's used because it's used to make up gain that the compressor reduces. A de-esser is similar to a compressor, but it acts at high frequencies. It's used to take sibilance out of vocal tracks. If you compress and EQ a vocal, sometimes you have a sibilance problem where the S's are out of proportion and level with the rest of the vocal. The de-esser has a control, threshold control. You can also adjust what frequency it begins acting at from 800 hertz to 8 kilohertz. Usually set these about 3.5, 4K here. This switch here, broadband or high frequency, means that the action of it when it's controlling an S in broadband means it's ducking the level of the entire signal. When it's in high frequency, it's just ducking the level of the frequencies above what you've set on this control. These are all digital multi-effects processors. They're capable of producing a variety of effects such as reverberation, delay, flanging, chorusing, sampling in some cases. We'll get into each unit a little bit and some of the effects that you can produce with them. This unit's capable of producing a wide variety of room simulations, different reverberations. I'll demonstrate here by putting the vocal track through it.
Lift your head, close your eyes, and see.
There's a short decay, small room, small live room. We can vary.
Tired,
larger room.
but I can't slow down. I can't slow down.
Long decay or even larger room. Several delay effects,
I'm raging alone.
which you can control the amount of delay here, or the length of the delay.
Fall right through. So far away from you.
Chorus effects, which are variable pitch shifts to fatten the sound. If you need more precise control of the parameters of this device, there's a remote control available. This remote control gives you a finer control over the parameters of these units than the front panel does. These units perform similar functions. They're in different price ranges, different degrees of sophistication. This is a higher priced Pro Studio unit here, which we'll get into some of the effects that this can do. Right now I have this unit set up for a simple delay. You can see here we can set the length of the delay. It's at 250 milliseconds now. Let's hear our singer here again, and
I play with fire.
you can control the length of the delay.
Play with fire.
You can control the feedback, the amount of regeneration, how many repeats.
Lift your head, close your eyes.
We have this set up to do pitch shifting now. Harmonizer program. We're looking at the pitch ratio. What's coming in is going out. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. As we go up on this, you can hear the pitch increase of that guitar. This effect can be used to precisely tune a vocal or instrument if you want to just fix a note that might be slightly out of tune, or else you could use it to widen and fatten a sound by combining a sound with a slightly pitch-shifted version or two different pitch-shifted versions of the same sound panned in different places. Another example of what these units can do is flanging. Flanging effect gets its name from how it used to be done in the days before effects processors. Flanging used to be achieved with two tape machines with identical spacing between the record and playback heads and therefore identical delays. The same audio signal was run to both tape machines and the outputs of both machines were mixed. You could vary the speed of one machine by holding onto the real flange. That's why it's called flanging. That would vary the speed of that one machine and the audio would be slightly out of time with the other machine, just enough that different portions of the frequency spectrum would cancel and others would reinforce, and it would shift through the spectrum as you change the speed. These units do that by having two delay lines. One delay is a fixed length, and one is varying against that. The outputs are summed, and you get the same effect as the two tape recorders. Another capability of this device and some other multi-effects devices is sampling, which is the ability to record a short portion of audio into the digital memory of the unit and play it back either on the cue of pushing a button or by an audio trigger going in or by MIDI from a sequencer. Let's record a little bit of this vocal in here.
Lift your head, close your eyes, and see what the...
Okay, now this is recorded in this unit, in the digital memory of this unit right now, and we'll edit. We can edit the start point of the sample. And the stop point.
Close your eyes. Close your eyes.
The sample will play when you hit play here. It can also be triggered by audio coming in. It could be triggered by MIDI from a sequencer or a synthesizer. Incidentally, all these effects devices can be driven by MIDI. So if you're sequencing, you can control the parameters and switch programs in real time. I'd like to get a little bit more in depth about reverb here with this unit here. This is a multi-effects unit, very strong on reverb programs, good reverb programs in here. I'll put the snare drum through it and show you what the decay time control does. Here's the snare drum with no additional reverb added to it. There's a very short room, 0.3 of a second. As we turn this, it controls the decay time, or the amount of time it takes for the reverb to die away. As you can hear, as we go up here, reverberation lasts a longer time. This is the initial delay or pre-delay. This is how long it waits before the onset of the reverberation. As you hear, there's like a discrete slap or delay before the reverb starts, simulating how far the instrument is from the walls of a real room, if you were using it to simulate a real room. There are many other parameters adjustable on most of these units, which I won't get into right now, but I would just suggest to experiment to get the most interesting sound you can for the particular piece of music you're working on. I think it's a good idea, if you can afford it, to have more than one unit, since you can have so you can have a delay, different kinds of reverb all happening at once in your mix, giving more interesting ambience. If you only have one effects unit capable of just one simultaneous effect, you might want to consider printing some of your effects on some of your instruments as you go to tape, and then using some in the mix. So therefore you can get more use out of what unit you have. Don't feel you have to use all the effects that these units are capable of at all times. Judicious, sparse use of effects can sometimes be much more effective in your music. Just create a believable ambience and an interesting stage for your music to take place in.
The relationship between you and your monitor speakers better be a good one, because you're going to spend an awful lot of time sitting at that board in front of these little babies. These are relatively inexpensive monitor speakers, Yamaha NS10s and the Tannoys, the 6.5s. Matter of personal taste. I like them both. The Yamahas probably have a little bit more punch in the mid-range, but the Tannoys are maybe a little smoother on the top end. Literally a matter of one man's meat, another man's poison, if you know what I mean. When you set your monitor speakers up, make sure you get the angle which the tweeters are aiming at your ears. They should, if you drew a straight line from each tweeter right to your ears, it should meet just about in front of the console and at the same height as your ears. What I've done with this Tannoy, it's the same thing. I've angled it slightly this way so that it meets just in front of the console. We're doing this because we're trying two different speakers out and we're comparing the two. You don't have to have two speakers, but it's kind of nice to have two different kinds. You can A/B them and see which one sounds better. Some people also like to have little mini speakers or even a boombox you could sit right about here. Kind of fun to do. Check your mix out. There are other speaker manufacturers out there in the real world today. JBL, KRK, HD1s by Meyer. Very sort of lab, analytical kind of speakers, very expensive. A lot of people use them. A lot of people use these. couple of other things I want to mention in our little project studio, and that is this Furman power conditioner. Nice little device, got a couple of lights there, makes seeing things in the dark a lot easier. But its main function is to filter the power, make sure you don't get too many power surges, clicks, bangs, pops. Makes your power a lot cleaner, so you don't have to take it to the laundry. And a word about monitor amplifiers. The monitor amplifier that you choose for these guys better be powerful, but not too powerful to blow them up. Put fuses in the back so you don't blow the tweeters and the woofers. They're very expensive to replace. A monitor amplifier should be clean, low distortion, should run efficiently for days on end. And a word about levels. If you're in the control room, don't blast the thing. You don't need to, because it's very exciting if you want to hear the bass drum or the snare drum or the whole mix for a minute or two at loud volume. But if you're in a situation where you're in a live concert, put your earplugs in. Protect your ears. Once your hearing starts to go, you'll never get it back. So in the control room, where you can control the environment and you can control the volume, turn it down. Actually, your mix will end up sounding an awful lot better if you mix at a quiet volume than at a loud volume. After you've done a mix, it's a very good idea to check out your mix in an environment which you trust, like your car, for instance. That doesn't really change that much. I mean, you sit in there and you pop the cassette in, turn up the volume. Now, you know what your local radio station sounds like. Pop in your cassette, listen to it. Boy, there's not enough bass. It's probably right, there isn't enough bass. When you pick a monitor system, go out to your local hi-fi store, music store, go to your friend's house, check out different speakers, and find something that you like that suits your personal taste, because, quite frankly, monitors are a matter of personal taste. Understanding MIDI technology is absolutely essential for any project studio. I'm going to introduce you to an old friend of mine, Jimmy Waldo. Used to be with Quiet Riot and a band called Alcatraz. I made an album with him, with Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen. And he knows all about this stuff. He's got his own project studio, and he has his own MIDI setup, and he's going to show us all about it.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Waldo, and we're in a project studio with, as you can see, a lot of gear here. What I'm going to do is explain what MIDI is. Most project studios, or just about all project studios nowadays, have huge MIDI setups, and that seems to be the heart of a home studio. Simply because you can't always have a whole band recording in your living room, and you can't always have a live drummer come in, so we got to do those kind of things with drum machines and synthesizers and samplers and things like that. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and that's a mouthful, so don't even attempt to say that. What that actually means is all the manufacturers have gotten together and decided on a standard by which all these instruments will talk to each other, so that if you buy one manufacturer's gear, it will communicate with another manufacturer's gear, so you're not left out in the cold. This is a MIDI sequencer. Basically, a computerized sequencer like this is used for storing note information. It doesn't store sound, just note information. It triggers the instruments and tells them what to do. So you program in the part, and it tells the instruments what to play. I'll just show you a little bit about a computer sequencer so you just get a rough idea of how they work. I'll put a little piece of music in here. In any MIDI sequencer, you have tracks, just like you would on a multi-track tape recorder, and MIDI channel assignments. So these are your tracks. These are your MIDI channels. Over here you can see I have MIDI channel 2, which is my drums. So I have several tracks of drums, so I have several tracks assigned to MIDI channel 2. This is my bass part. I only have one track of bass, so I only have one track with MIDI channel 1 on it. I have an organ part here, which is on track 7, which is on MIDI channel 4, so on. So I'll play a little of this just so you get the idea. So what you're hearing is a drum kit with some percussion, a bass part, and an organ part. So in this case, our drums are on tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're on MIDI channel 2. Now the reason we have MIDI channels is they're 1 through 16. And the reason why you have that is so that the drum information in your computer is not playing your bass instrument, and the bass information in the computer is not playing the drums, and so on. Get very confusing. I'm going to try to clarify the MIDI mystery just a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that is to sort of explain the stream of MIDI information, the way it flows and where it goes and what it does. So we'll start with the master keyboard. Computer sequencers are generally controlled by one main master keyboard in a studio. The master keyboard sends information to the computer. The computer then records the information. Then the information sends out on whatever MIDI channels you have set to your different modules. All these instruments are connected together by what's known as a MIDI cable, which makes sense since we're talking about MIDI instruments. MIDI cable comes out of the back of your master keyboard, out of the output, goes to the computer, out of the computer through what's known as a MIDI through box, which is just a junction box for MIDI cables, then goes to the rest of your MIDI gear, so you can control everything from the master and the computer, and it all talks to each other. Now we're going to go record a little piece of information in the computer just so you get an idea about how that works. So let's see, we're going to take MIDI channel 5, and we're going to go over here to the Roland Super JD, which I've set on MIDI channel 5, and we're going to find a sound. I don't like that one. Let's see. Okay, we'll use the brass sound and we'll put that in. Okay, so we're going to check that. Okay, so that's good. Now what I'd like to do is do a real quick edit here to give you a little idea about how you can move things around in a computer sequencer. And it's really pretty simple. Most companies' software works the same way. You don't need, by the way, you don't need to buy real expensive software. Some of this stuff is 3 or 4 times the price of some other stuff. And if you're doing big orchestras for film or something like that, then you need a more expensive piece of hardware, software. But when you're working in a project studio at home writing songs, you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. They all will do what you need them to do for basic songwriting. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do a real simple edit on here and show you how simple it is to do edits in computer sequencers. Just highlight your tracks. What I'm going to do is take the first section of the song and we're going to copy it down and stick it against the second section of the song so they'll play back to back. Set a place in the song for it to start, and this is what we're going to get. So you can see how easy it is. I mean, that took, that took 15 seconds. Let's say I want to copy my brass part over there, I just drop it, and you'll hear it repeat. So it's real simple. And it all works the same way. Like I said, all these companies, all the software basically works the same way. Again, read your manuals. Don't be afraid to call the companies and ask them. They have guys there that's all their job is to answer questions about your problems if you get snagged on something. It's no big deal. Another thing I'd like to mention is in regards to sequencers and home studios, for the guy that's only got a 4-track or an 8-track, you can do what's called, you print a sync tone on one track of your tape and feed that back into your sequencer, and by way of the sync tone, which is usually SMPTE code or FSK code, you can then run the sequencer and it will be in sync with your tape all the time. So at this point we can go ahead and put down guitars or vocals or other acoustic type instruments on tape. And by doing that, what you end up with is something that sounds like a 24 or 48 track recording, because essentially what you have is however many pieces of MIDI gear you have, that's how many things they're going to be playing simultaneously. So you get a much bigger sound without having to invest in 24 track tape machines or whatever. So that to me is a big bonus about having MIDI gear and sequencers in a smaller home project studio. Very handy. When the projects I've done with Eddie and with other people where I'm working on people's records, we'll do the same thing in a major studio. We may be working on 24 or 48 track. We'll print sync tone on one track and still trigger all the MIDI gear to keep it off of tape, to give us plenty of tracks to do everything else. So that's a real standard thing you do. And again, the hardware to do that is very cheap. It's cheap, inexpensive, easy to use, and there's no magic to that. So that's something I think is very valuable.
Hello, James. You finished that bloody MIDI track yet?
I have. It's sufficiently finished.
You mean you've had a genteel sufficiency of it?
I've been battling the bits.
You've been battling the bits.
How about that? That's good.
I like
man.
that.
That's
It reminds me of a old story. Anyway, about studio gear and having fun and making records, I think
this is a pretty good setup. I mean,
this is great. I mean,
Yeah.
I could make a serious record here.
Yeah, I think what we've done is really good, and the MIDI thing, I mean, really integrated well without getting in the way, and we didn't get hung up in all the technology and all that stuff.
The bands that you've been involved with, your involvement in terms of keyboard and contributing synthesizer bits, the bits that would drive us crazy.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the technology has improved so much over the last 5 years. The fact that, you know, you can buy a synthesizer for a couple of grand and literally be in the driver's seat, so to speak, in the computer world.
Right. That's right.
Tell us something about that.
Well, when I did some of those records, you needed to get a big fat MIDI sound, you needed to use a lot more keyboards. So it was always constantly dragging tons of gear in the studio, and everybody's a producer, so there's 5 people yelling at you about, no, I like this sound, I didn't like that sound, pull the strings out, we want more, layer this in, layer. It's easier now in that the gear is really does sound better. There's some of the vintage analog gear that, you know, the older gear that sounds great, but I mean, really today's gear, it's a little bit easier to work with. You can take one keyboard in the studio, and I mean, I've done records recently where I just had like 2 pieces of gear, and you get so many great sounds out of it, you know.
You know what's interesting to me today, particularly, excuse me, in terms of the modern technology that we have at our disposal, is when you and I, as mixers, producers, get to the very end of the project, and we spent, you know, hundreds and hundreds of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars usually on your type of project and my type of project.
My money.
Of your money, yes.
Right.
We get to the point, you know, where we've mixed everything, and you like to mix a half-inch.
Correct, half-inch analog.
I love to mix
Usually
a half-inch.
Dolby
analog.
SR.
Usually 15 IPS Dolby SR because of the low-end response. But you've got takes of mixes with an intro up or a verse down or a bridge up, or the vocal has been just tweaked like a half dB. And you've got like 4 or 5 mixes. Now, normally when we edit this stuff, in the old days, we used to take a razor blade and cut it together. Now we've got DigiDesign, Pro Tools, we've got all forms of editing, the Akai, DD1000. I mean, the technology gives us a lot more choices, but in some ways I think it kind of takes away because we spend so much time doing alternate mixes where in the old days we say, oh, that's the mix, okay, cut it, see you later. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. I think with this, and I think also with all mixes now being automated, I think we can get a lot more precise, but I think we have to be really careful that a mix, in a way, is a performance. Where we're setting a stage for the music, what we're doing is creating an ambience for the music to live in.
And how did you actually start? I mean, what got you into wanting to be an engineer versus a musician or whatever? I mean,
I liked music and electronics when I was a kid, and
same as me.
And I worked when I was, you know, in high school. I worked. My first gig was working in a hi-fi store. You know, fixing turntables, like you know, simple repairs, oiling stuff, fixing it up, and you know, learn a little more about it. And I built. My parents were nice enough to let me use the basement of the house for a little studio. And where I worked at the hi-fi store, got a couple old tape recorders, old Ampex 960s was my first machines.
Wow. I remember those.
home type Ampexes, upgraded later, ended up with a
Started off
Scully.
pretty high end there. Huh?
Ended up with a Scully 4-track, Scully 284 track down there. I used those old Ampex MX-10 tube mixers, and that's how I started out. I had my first little studio in my parents' basement. And went
Wouldn't
from
you
there.
agree that's the best way to learn those? I mean,
think-
literally build this,
Right.
put it together yourself and understand how the gear works, so that when you're going out and buying all this stuff, you really have a better understanding of what it is you need and what you're buying.
Sure, it's very easy these days because everything that you really need is available, and it's available in some form at a very reasonable
Yeah,
price. Back
yeah.
then, if you
You
wanted
had
to
to
build, if
sweat
you wanted a
bullets.
studio,
Yeah.
I mean, you had to build. If you wanted a studio and had very little money, you had to scrounge and fix up stuff and build stuff.
In England in the 60s, I mean, I bought myself a Brunel tape recorder and an old ribbon microphone. I used to record my friends at my house. I had a nice little piano and a jazz trio, and they used to come in. I used to have one ribbon mic, and I'd move it around from instrument to instrument. And then I just made the decision to get into the recording business. I said, in fact, literally, this is what I did. I got hold of the advertising yearbook, opened it up where it said recording studios, because I figured, okay, electronics, music, that's where I belong, right, in a recording studio. I closed my eyes and went like this. Where the pen landed, I wrote off half a dozen letters, and one of them came back and said, come for an interview. And I started in 63.
And going back to the home studio for a second, we were doing the Quiet Riot demos at my house, and it was an apartment. And we had the very similar situations we have here. All we had to, as an ISO booth, was a bathroom. We had no place else to put things. So we had a small little solid-state Marshall that we put in this spare bathroom. We sat it on the toilet. We put a 57 right on it, and then we took a 421 and hung it in a shower with sliding doors. And this is honest to God's truth. We hung the 421 down in there. We opened the shower doors thinking, well, you need to open the shower doors to get the sound in, really good. We found we could EQ that mic by closing the shower door. And Carlos would play. I would slowly close the door until he would stop playing and yell, "That's great." And we'd blend those two tracks. And home studio recording, I mean, this 421 sounded so obnoxious by itself, but you blend it with a 57 and just use it as a little bit of ambience. It made that little Marshall sound more like a big Marshall in a bigger room.
That's what we were saying today.
$200 worth of microphones.
Right. I mean, in this program, we're saying exactly that. Be really inventive.
Right.
Use the space that's around you. Use the closet. Use the bathroom. I mean, use the roof if you have to.
Yeah.
I think in more cases than not, we're using all this to try to create a real physical space. In some cases, we're using this for a blatant special effect, but usually we're using gear to try to create a believable natural space. If we have the natural space, we should use that first. I think a lot of times to use a room, if you don't have a large room, to use a small room to get your early reflections, and then use a longer artificial reverb on top of that will give you a more believable acoustic feel than just doing it all with an artificial device.
You guys remember those record before they had drum machines? There was a company that put out a series of LPs called Drum Drops.
Right.
That's all I had. I didn't have a drum machine, so I had drum drops. I was always bummed out because they were really dry.
They're not like gumdrops
You
or
couldn't
bum
eat
drops.
these,
I mean,
no.
these were drum drops.
Very dry. And it bummed me out. You couldn't get that, the big heavy rock drum sound. So I would put the record on, play that, take my ghetto blaster, which has compression in the stereo mics, and get across the bedroom and angle it up at a shiny ceiling and get the reflection across the bedroom and record that onto metal tape. And then I would use the metal tape, throw that onto one track of a 4-track, and you had a big ambient drum sound on your 4-track. I mean,
It's called
and it was
using your
compressed.
imagination.
I
Yeah.
had no compressor. We couldn't afford
Because
a compressor.
the compressor was
exactly.
in
It was
the
built
ge-
in the ghetto blaster
ghetto
mics to keep it from distorting.
That's great.
So you had this nice compressed, fat, completely out of control drum sound. But that's what I was looking for to write that kind of
This
stuff.
kind of thing reminds me, when you did the old Hendrix albums, was that tape flanging on the vocal or something?
That's a really funny story.
Because I wanted to hear that because I wanted to say why I wanted to ask you this is because when I was first starting recording, I was just a kid in my parents' basement when those albums were out, and I was recording a band. I wanted to get a vocal sound like that, and we ended up using a length of 4-inch diameter heating duct, and the singer singing like that in the microphone.
Oh, that's great.
That's great.
That's
And
great.
it's cheap too.
Yeah.
But you know who told us about that? It was George Martin. When he came into Olympic and we were doing the Beatles, we did All You Need Is Love, did that basic track, and then they took it over to EMI and they did all their string overdubs on it. That was 4-track. And anyways, they came back and we were doing Baby You're a Rich Man, and we were bugging him all the time. Said, look, how do you get this sound? You know, we've been hearing it on the previous Beatle records. And he said, well, you take the two tape machines and you feed one signal into the other and compare the two and then throw it out of phase and get a VFO, a variable frequency oscillator. And we said, oh, is that how you do it? And we went nuts for like 2 weeks. And George Keans, who was my assistant at the time, he said, well, let's do it in stereo. Forget this mono stuff, let's do it in stereo. For the very first time ever, we had done it in stereo. And we brought Jimmy into the studio. And it was for a track called Axis Boulder's Love. And, you know, where the drums come in from the left, they go,
Right.
and I sat Jimmy down next to me like this, and I played it for him, and he freaked out. He said, man, he literally, he fell on the floor from the couch onto the floor. He said, man, he was holding his head like, that's like my dream. I said, it feels like I'm underwater. That's the dream I've been having. And he said, oh, play it again for me. We played it for him for like 13 times in a row. He freaked, he totally freaked. I mean, it freaked us out too, but he was just so knocked out with that sound. So of course we had to use it on a lot of tracks, you know.
Yeah, and use it on the vocal track a lot.
Use it on the vocals. I use it on Traffic, on
Very-
Dear Mr. Fantasy. You can hear it at the end where it's all phasing out there. Anyway.
You know, to me, one of the best things about a studio like this is and if you want to sit around and try to learn how to be an amazing engineer and aspire to go on to be like you guys, that's fine. But the most valuable thing from a musician standpoint, I think, should be to have the luxury to be in your home for free, not paying an hourly rate, and hone your craft, your songwriting, or if you're a guitar player, your guitar playing, your arranging. You know, a singer, it would be a great thing. A singer especially, I think, well, everybody, the more you record yourself, the better you get. The more you hear, tape doesn't lie. You record, it sounds bad, you keep working on it. And home studio should be used for that, for proving testing ground as much as listen to my fantastic sounding demo that I, you know, use my new $400 reverb on.
You know, this is a marvelous thing to be able to come into a studio like this and, you know, make a record, which you can virtually do. You can walk out of this place with virtually a finished piece of product that will almost, but not quite, but almost rival what you can get in a professional studio. The only thing you can't do in here is live drums. And I think it's great that this technology that we have at our disposal, I mean, has come along. You know, 5 years ago, we couldn't do this. I mean, we couldn't record digital 8-track or 16 or 24-track for $3,500 a piece. It was impossible.
Well, I would think that a tendency when you have a lot of this gear and everything is to use, is to say, okay, I can get a great sound out of this, great sound out of this, a great sound out of this, and you can. But I think my tip would be that if you have this at home, have this kind of setup at home, to experiment, to use,
because the time is your own.
Right, because the time is your own, to experiment, make effects, make sounds out of combinations of what you can get with different gear and with the room.
Right.
With mic placement.
See, that is the key, because not many people really think about mic placement. And I think that if you can go to an amplifier and put a 57 in the correct spot, find that sweet spot,
Right.
you don't have to do much EQ at the board.
Yeah, go out there, if you're engineering yourself, go out there with a pair of headphones, listening to that mic, so you can hear its sweet spot, you can hear what you want, and then go back and maybe EQ it a little, tweak it a little.
It really does come down to the songs and the quality of the playing, the energy and stuff, and not necessarily do you play perfectly in time, but is there a groove and is there feeling? And that's, we go back to your time is your own at home, you know, in a home studio. That's where you learn to be a great performer, player, whatever. But and not using gear as a crutch to try to make you sound like a better player. That's not where it's at.
And don't go past where it feels great at
Right.
home. Even if you have all that time, and you're a player, don't try to perfect the execution of it at the expense of the groove of a part.
That's right.
For God's sake, just don't get lazy. Just practice your craft, you know. All this wonderful gear, it's great and everything, but practice your craft, practice your instrument. Welcome back to Adventures in Modern Recording. I'll be taking you through the second program on recording techniques. By now, you probably have a good idea of the equipment that's available and what it can do for you. We began with a look at the history of recording and how the industry got to where it is today. John Storyk explained some of the fundamental properties of sound, and he gave us some great ideas on how to make the best of our room acoustics. We looked at different types of microphones, their pickup patterns, and how to choose the best mic for each application. Next, we took a look at the centerpiece of your project studio, the console, and gave it a real workout. Mick Guzauski covered tape machines, digital editing, and outboard gear, and we discussed the importance of a good listening environment. Finally, Jimmy Waldo took us through the world of computers and MIDI technology. So let's return now to our project studio and make a great record. Okay, we're ready to start recording, and there's a couple of common ways that we can do this live or direct, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But remember that in this project studio, you have constraints of space. So find places where you can do things like background vocals, like your bathroom, or put an amp in a closet. So, with that in mind...
That right?
Yeah, sounds fine.
Okay. 2 bars for nothing for the guitar. Verse. Different kick drum.
Yeah, that bass drum sounds really good. It's a little tighter, and I think it fits better with the track.
Much sharper than the last one we were using.
Oh yeah, that was kind of mushy.
Use the same snare?
Same snare, but thanks to Eddie's Genius EQ, I think it's a big improvement.
Nada. Listen, all I did was I just brightened it up a bit and made it sound like it was more live and in the room. You know, that kind of thing.
So why don't you want to check out these crash rides at the end?
Yeah,
Because
sure,
that's
why not?
like a big exciting thing, and we got to make sure that that sounds realistic. So here we go. So fill going in. So change cymbals here
like
back
that.
and forth to alternate ride on the
Using
right
two
crash.
cymbal
Yeah.
sounds?
Yeah, check it.
They like definition in the hits with
Yeah,
the 2.
much better than we had before.
I like that because it sounds more animalistic. It sounds like you're doing like a live gig, and plus it drives the whole end of the song.
Yeah.
That was great, Jimmy. I really thank you very much. But I tell you what, Dennis and I are going to leave you for a little while to your own particular devices, and I hope you get it right, mate.
Yeah, typical. Thanks a lot. Okay, I'll see you guys in a while. Come back, and this will be perfect, I promise. In our last program, we talked about doing drum programming in a MIDI sequencer, computer-based MIDI sequencer. So now we're going to do it in a drum machine. I'm going to explain a little bit about how a drum machine works and how you actually do drum programs. Basically, a drum machine is a box with a lot of digitally recorded drum sounds in it, as well as percussion sounds. The way all drum machines work in a pattern, what's called a pattern mode. So a pattern can be anywhere from 1 beat to 16 bars, 32 bars, whatever you need. You assemble a lot of patterns into a song after you do your fill the patterns. I know there's a lot of people out there that are real familiar with this gear and have done a lot of this already, but this is basically for guys that are trying to put together their home studios and have never done this. So hopefully this will give you a little insight on how to go about it. So drum machine's a really important tool in home recording, whether you're a songwriter or you've got a band, you're trying to construct stuff, because it's just not possible to cut live drums in a home studio. It costs a lot of money to go into a real studio and do it, and this is a lot more relaxed way to do it and makes a lot more sense. Basically, the way we start programming is we pick an empty pattern. In this case, we know we have a 2-bar count-off for the song we're going to work on. First thing we do is set our quantization, which corrects your timing. If you're a little sloppy, this will correct it. In this case, we know we're playing a lot of eighth notes, so we put the quantize to correct eighth notes. So that's the first thing we do, so it's set on eighths. We go up here and make sure our click volume is up and playing quarter notes. And now we'll put our count off in like this. Okay, we get that in. Now we want to check that out. Okay, we've got that. Now we go to another empty pattern, and we need in this case, for the song we've been working on, we need a 2-bar section with eighth note hi-hats for the guitar player to play against before the actual drums come in. So we're going to put that in. We go to pattern number 2, which is an empty pattern, and we do the same thing. We check our quantization. Everything should be the same. Velocity's okay. Whoops.
our length needs to be the same, 2 bars for the 2-bar intro. So we get that, put that, and we do it like this. Check that. Okay, so now we have pattern number 2 is our 2-bar introduction. Now we need a verse pattern. So our verse patterns are going to be 4 bars instead of 2 bars. We check our quantization, that's fine. This one needs to be a 4-bar pattern, so we go up to our length and set that for 16 beats, which is 4 bars. Lock that in, go to compose, and we do it like this. Okay, now we'll check that, make sure that's okay. Now we need to put a hi-hat in. In this case, it's going to be an 8th note hi-hat that will overdub against that pattern. Very easy, and again, all these drum machines work basically the same way. So this overdubbing parts is real simple. Do it like this. Okay, check that, make sure our hi-hat's okay. Okay, so basically, that's really all there is to it. And for the rest of the song, you would build your chorus pattern the same way. Any drum fills or anything, you build a pattern with a drum fill in it or crashes or whatever you need. So when you get done constructing all your patterns, and a little side note here, it's a really good idea to keep a chart of the song. Chart the song out before you do the programming. When you get done with the programming, you get done with all your patterns, name the patterns on a chart so you have some sort of point of reference and you don't have to continually scroll around in the display looking for patterns and wondering what they are. So now we go into what's known as the song mode, and we're going to assemble our patterns to build a song. So we go into compose song. Now we go pattern number 1, which we know is our 2-bar count off. After that comes pattern number 2, which is our 2-bar intro. After that, we put pattern number 3, which is our verse pattern, and so on. That's basically the general way a drum machine works. And then you just stack your patterns. If you have drum fills, you make a pattern of a drum fill, put that in where it needs to be. Very simple. You can shuffle patterns around, do whatever you want. So let's check this out and see if we got something that sounds like a song. There's our count off. Introduction, verse.
That was really good, Jimmy.
Almost like a live drummer.
Almost, not quite. What I'd like to stress here is when you transfer this information onto tape, I want to make sure that everybody understands where we're going with this information. Your inputs are 21, 22, 23, and 24. The bass drum's coming in, snare, overheads, and overheads. These are going to tracks numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Write the information down in addition on your track sheet so you don't get lost afterwards. Bass drum on 1, snare on 2, hi-hat on 3 with the left crash, the ride on 4 with the right crash. Okay, let's start getting our drum sounds together. We're going to take the output of the drum program and plug it into the console and start with the bass drum, which is on channel 21. And if you follow my finger up this line over here to this black chord here, this is where it's coming into number 21. This is your mic line switch. We're in the line position. If it happens to be too low a level, you can put it in the mic position. But it seems to be fine here. Let's see what we got. We pull the fader up, hit bus 1, find unity gain. Look at our meter over here. Yeah, it's going to channel 1. And on this side of the board is our monitor. Turn that up. Now you can see it's definitely coming in on 1. Now let's see over here on our digital machine whether it's hitting track 1. Yeah, magically it is. There it is in all its glory, kicking butt. Now that we've got the bass drum more or less in the ballpark in terms of level, let's see what happens when we add EQ to it. By pushing the EQ button in, I can now adjust anything in this frequency range. Let's try some lows. Wow, check that out. You see what has happened? The level has jumped quite considerably. Now why is that? Because we've added about 6 dB of boost at 80 cycles. Now that's enough to take down a bloody house. So you've got to be careful. You back your fader off, add your highs, add your mids, add your low mids, or remove them as the case may be, like this. What I like to do sometimes in a live drum situation is to remove some of the lower mid frequencies of the bass drum and add the super low stuff like around the 60 to 80 to 90 hertz. So in this case, since it's a pre-recorded bass drum sampled from a computer, I don't have to do that as much. So let's see what happens when I add the super lows, remove some of the low mid frequencies, and boost the mid highs around about 3K. Sounds pretty punchy. Now, when I say around that frequency, what I mean is you have to tailor it to the sound of the bass drum. If it's a bass drum that sounds kind of woofy, you use your ear, preferably your left one. Great, now let's just do the snare. Same procedure. We open up bus number 2 to unity gain, open up fader number 2, and we assign a little bus switch to number 2 and panning it to the right. And this will appear over here on the right side, track number 2. One thing I want to tell you is also the fact that it's coming in on channel number 22 down this strip here. And you can see this little green light flickering away, telling us that it's home. There it is. Now what I'm going to do with the snare is brighten it up a little bit because I think it's sounding a little on the dull side. Once again, don't forget, you've got to do your line trim. What I've done to it is I've added some super highs around about 12K. I've added a little bit of low mids because I thought it was sounding a little lacking in the lower mid range, around about 250 cycles. And in the high mids, I used this little equalizer here where it says 3K. It's a personal tasting. I happen to like it. Great, that's the snare. Now let's do the left crash. Bring up fader number 23 to unity gain. Bring up bus number 3 to unity gain. Make sure you adjust the line trim on 23 so you get unity gain. One thing you'll notice that there's a crash in there. That crash is part of the mix that's coming from Jimmy's drum machine. It's already pre-programmed, it's already mixed in there, and I don't have any control of the crash and the hi-hat. But if Jimmy has done his job and I've listened correctly, with my left ear, not my right, it should be a reasonable sort of compromise between the crash being too far forward or the hi-hat being too far forward. So let's listen to that one more time. Not a bad sound, but I think we can improve upon it. Don't forget, there are two instruments there. There is a hi-hat and a crash cymbal. Let's put our EQ in. Bring in the high end, just to bring up the sparkle of the cymbals. See, that 12K over here just helps the cymbal ring. Sounds pretty neat. The next track will be going to track 4. Now, the way we do that is we assign input number 24 to bus number 4 by panning it, not to the left, but to the right, and pushing up bus number 4. Now that sounds a bit low in level, so now we need to bring up the trim gain control to bring it up to unity gain. And let's try some EQ. That's better. Now let's hear them both together. Excellent. Hey Jimmy, you know that hi-hat's a little bit on the low side. Do you think you could crank up the level a bit, please?
Sure. No problem. Try the closed first,
A
semi-closed.
little bit more. That's
that?
good. Hit it, please. Yeah. That sounds much better. Yeah. I think that's going to be fine. I think it'll work with the drum track. Yeah, that rocks. I like to approach drum miking and drum presentation in the stereo picture from the drummer's perspective rather than from the listener's perspective. I like to feel like I'm behind the drums banging away there. So the hi-hat will obviously be in my left and the cymbals will be going from my left to my right. Same with the toms. High tom first, all the way across down to the low toms. Now, some people don't like that, but once again, it's a matter of personal taste. Now that we've got a great drum track, Greg is going to do a bass overdub for us. And if you're building a project studio, it's a very cool idea to have a closet available for isolation, because inside we can do stuff like this. Put a bass amp or a guitar amp in the closet. You can mic it up, put some padding on the walls to reduce the amount of sound so your neighbors don't complain. Put some padding on the doors. You could even pad it on the ceiling. Close the door. Let's go over to Greg and see what he's got. He's got a nice old bass there, which we're going to feed into a DI box right from the instrument itself. Lovely bass, mate. Down here into our DI box. That's going to be fed to the console. This is the feed from the instrument, and this is being fed to the amplifier. Now let's go over there to the board and see what kind of a sound we can make out of it. All right, Greg, I wonder if you could play some bass for me. We'll see if we can get a good sound and put it on tape. I'll bring up the old DI, which is channel 18. I'm going to assign it to bus 5. I'm going to bring bus 5 up like that. Just for unity gain. Crank up the old preamp level there at the top. Push in some EQ. Low frequency. Down in the 80 cycle region. And because it's a DI, I want to add some low mids. Around about 210 cycles to be precise. If I was fortunate enough to have a Pultec MEQ5, which is a tube equalizer, that's what I would use in the Pro Studios. But I will say this equalizer does a very handsome job of enhancing the low mids. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Now let's try some compression on that. And over here, I've got a compressor in. Now we'll just flip the switch. It's in bypass at the moment, but we'll flip the switch and have a listen. Wow, it's pretty good. 2-to-1 compression ratio. And I adjust the output gain so that, as you can tell, I've matched it up to a nice fat 0 there. That sounds pretty good. All right, let's check out the bass amp. Bring up the microphone, which is a 421 in our famous closet. Bring it up, get unity gain, go up to the top here and adjust the line or mic trim, as the case may be. In this case, it's a mic trim. And let's try some equalization. Yes, that amp sounds like it needs a bit of super lows. Tiny little bit of 12K. And in this case on the amp, I want it to growl a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some high mids around about 3K, because I really want the picking sound of this plectrum to stand out. That sounds pretty good. Now that we've got all the gain, let's flip in the switch on the, whoops, that's a bit loud, isn't it? Okay, so now we have to reduce the output gain to 0 there, match the gain up. We're on 6. That looks pretty good. Right, once again we go over to the compressor and we adjust the compression ratio. As you can see, when I crank up the gain reduction, these little LEDs go a little crazy and they start dancing around there. You don't want too much of that. You don't want to squash the amp too much. Just the right amount of compression. Now, how do you know when it's the right amount of compression? Well, you use your ears. I mean, if it sounds like it's squashing coming out of a Kleenex box, that's obviously wrong. But for some people, they like that. I don't like that. I like it to breathe a bit. So when I combine it with the DI, it'll sound like this. Okay, let's try one for real now, okay? I think it's, how's the Q level, okay?
Levels are fine.
Great. For those of you who only have 8 tracks, or even less, 4 tracks to play with, it's a really good idea to think of your tracks as a chess game. We're going to do a bounce because we need the tracks, and I'd like to show you how you have to label the board in a clear and concise manner. Bass drum, or as they say in America, kick drum. I'm going to put a little K there for kick, just because you guys like the word kick. I like the word bass drum. Snare, the left crash, the hi-hat. We have a right crash, and we have a ride cymbal. And then, in these 2 tracks, we have bass, DI, bass, amp, and a click track. Let's say you have 7 tracks filled up with information, 4 tracks of drums, 2 tracks of bass, and a click track. You have 1 track open. That's the trick. Leave yourself someplace to go to. Well, first step is plan it like a chess game. Take your bass tracks, these 2, and we're going to bounce them to track 8. Push number 8. Now we're going to get a nice mix on that. Bounce these 2 over to here. That means we now have 2 tracks open once that step has been done. Then we can take these 4 drum tracks, 1 through 4, and bounce them to the 2 bass tracks. Once that is achieved, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks open. If we so wish to do so, we could scrub the click. The first couple of Hendrix albums that I was fortunate enough to do were 4-track, and we used to go 4 to 4 to 4. In other words, each step of the way I had to make sure that the stereo mix that I did was really accurate, and all the sounds were created in that mix. So, rule of thumb, plan your mix out, make sure you have a track to go to, and you have a lot of fun doing your bounces. Okay, I'm going to move the 2 condenser microphones onto this lovely Ovation acoustic guitar. That's good. I'm going to stick this one mic down the bottom end of the guitar and the other mic right near the top end of the neck, away from the boominess of the whole of the guitar. Let's hear a chord. Oh, that sounds good. I think these are pretty much in the right position. Now we also have a DI, I believe. Is it plugged in? Let's check on the back of the guitar. Yep, DI is plugged in. It's a great guitar, the Ovation, because you have the advantage of a nice acoustic sound as well as a cool DI sound. Let's make sure these mics are correctly positioned. And check our DI box, which is over here. Goes right in there where it says instrument. Pickup, because it's we're going to convert the old pickup to a low impedance so it can feed our console right from here. Okay, now that we've mic'd our acoustic guitar with these 2 AKG C391s, they're condenser mics. They're reasonably priced, and generally speaking affordable for a project studio. They need power. Now you can use a battery on them, or you can get power from the console. This console happens to have a phantom power supply, and there's a switch here which turns it on. Okay, David, could you play me a little bit of the acoustic? I just want to check the DI sound first, okay?
Okay.
Okay, hold on 1 second, please, David. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to add some EQ because I think the guitar itself is a little lacking in the bottom end, so we'll kick some EQ in. Could you play again, please, David? And what I'm also going to add is a little bit of some low mids and some super highs and a tiny, tiny bit of the normal high frequency, the 12K. Okay, and again, please. And now the EQ's out. And again, David. Yeah, you can hear how the difference when that EQ kicks in. Let's try with the EQ in again. That's good. All right, now I'm going to try a little experimentation with the a chorus device off the DI, sending it off of the auxiliary send, right over here, and returning it on 2 faders over here to 13 and 14, which we're going to include in our mix. And a chorus device is this PCM70 digital effects processor. It says chorus. Very simple, straight ahead chorus. Okay, David. Okay, I'm going to try the acoustic guitar mics themselves, the 2 condenser microphones that we so carefully placed. All right, David. All right, what I'd like to do with this, I'd like to give it the benefit of the doubt and include some nice EQ. I'm going to put the EQ buttons in, and I'm going to add some 12 kC, 12 kilohertz, that is, up the top end. And I'm going to try add a little bit of 7,000 cycles approximately. This is a parametric type equalizer, and I'm going to try and give it round about 7,000 cycles, right about this spot over here. And a little tiny bit of low mids, round about 250 cycles. Yeah, there is a vast improvement to the sound of that acoustic guitar. What we're doing is we're splitting it in stereo. One microphone is going to the left, one microphone is going to the right. We have our equalization in. And now what we can do in addition to that is to give it a little bit more tastiness by adding the chorus effect from our auxiliary on the acoustic guitar microphones. That's really nice. Now let's add the DI in and see what we get. That sounds really good. Now, for the final pièce de résistance, we're going to compress the whole bus as it's going to tape. That will give us a little bit more presence. Okay, David, play away. That's really good. What the compression is doing is that it is giving the presence by raising the lower end and squashing the top end and just pulling everything up together so that when you include it in the mix, you're not going to lose anything. What I've done on this is I've preset a compressor on the DI with very, very heavy compression. And this is going to stick the DI right up the middle of the mix, right in the center between the acoustic guitar microphones. And now if I add in the chorus, and the acoustic guitar mics, we get a beautiful blend. I think it sounds really pretty. Let's try and put it on tape, shall we? We're going to try and record a rhythm guitar in our limited space in our project studio, and the best way to do that is to use our closet again. What we have is a Marshall amplifier in the closet with 2 dynamic microphones, a 57 Beta and a Shure SM7, a more expensive version of 57. We're going to try to get a good sound out of this Marshall, but just be careful with the level. Obviously, you can't crank it up all the way. You're going to get some leakage, but it'll minimize the leakage by all the dampening that we have in here. Well, let's try and get a good guitar sound out of this. Okay, let's put this electric guitar part down, try and double up the acoustic guitar. We'll use the Telecaster because it's got a really, really cool twangy sound, and then we'll probably double it up with the SG. Let's hear it, David. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some EQ in, and it'll be a little bit of low frequency because I feel that the microphone is not giving me quite what I want. All right, and a little bit of highs and a little bit of low mids, 220. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Now let me check the SM7. I'm going to add some EQ now. I'm going to try this equalization in here, put some low frequencies in, take a little bit of the lower mids out and add some highs. That's without the equalization, that's without EQ, and now I'll play it again. Okay, now we'll combine the 2 microphones together. Okay, what I'd like to try now is add some compression to this. That's very good. Okay, let's try print that. Okay, David, if you could play for me a little bit of the crunchy guitar part with the SG, because it's got that big, dark, thick, heavy sound, which I love so much. Let's just have a listen to that, and I'll see. I'm going to have to change the EQ a little bit on this. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the EQ quite radically from the other guitar. The other guitar was quite thin in the mid-range, and this is very thick in the mid-range. So I'm going to roll some of the lower mids off and really boost up the high end to make it really speak through. High mids, boost, low mids, roll off, high mids at the very top end, up, and the low frequencies back. Okay, that's really good. Now let me hear the other mic. Okay, you can hear that's pretty dull. I'm going to put the EQ in and do the same, pretty much the same thing, okay? Okay, David, now let's hear both of them together. That's a pretty chunky sound. That sounds really, really good, and that will blend beautifully with a Telecaster. Let's try put that on tape. That was great, that rhythm part. Let's, with the same guitar, let's put the lead on. Let's do it. When you're recording your vocals, a very important point here is what microphone are you going to choose? And there's a lot of choices. We have a condenser mic and a couple of dynamics. And each one of them is going to sound completely different. The environment in which you record the vocalist is also very critical. Sometimes you may want to put your vocalist outside on the lawn, as I've done with Robert Plant. Gives a very unique atmosphere, and the acoustics are completely different. You hear lots of birds and airplanes flying overhead. Makes it a cool thing. We're here in a project studio, and we are going to try on David, our singer, these 3 microphones. And one of the things I'm going to talk to him about is, now, David, when you get up to this microphone here with this pop shield, which is only about 2 fingers away from the actual mic, don't eat the microphone. Not good. What happens is you get this close proximity effect that's building up, and you get a lot of bottom end. Not very cool. Unless, of course, you're doing a quiet piece of the song. Move into the microphone for the quiet bits and back off for the loud bits. This is a microphone technique that you can practice. If you get pops, that's what the pop shield's here for, to protect the P's and the B's from really becoming obnoxious in the mix. If you don't happen to have a pop shield, it's a very good idea to sing across the microphone. It'll minimize the pops. Now I'm going to put the pop shield back up, approximately 2-finger distance from the microphone. And to keep a uniform volume, it'd be a very good idea to use this rule of thumb. 4 fingers in front of the nose, right up to the pop shield. That's an excellent working distance for most microphones. David, let's have a listen to your vocal. Let's just see what we got. And I'd like to compare the 3 vocal mics that we've got and see which one suits your voice the best, okay? I'll wind back.
Fill my veins, fill my lungs, and see how they run. You say I'm tired.
Yeah, I'm not so keen on that. That's the 414. That's the expensive condenser mic. Not really happy with that one. Let's try the Sennheiser on the right there. Let's see what we get. I'll just play it from here. You can pick it up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great.
But it's a long way down, a long way down to the sky. I'm floating around.
Yeah, that one sounds a little muffly to me. Let's sing in the middle one. Sing in the 58. Pick it up from here.
A long way down to the sky. I'm floating around. The rain comes down.
Yeah, I like that. That's the best. I mean, it's got a nice mid-range brightness to it, and it's because of the fact it's a cheap mic. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I just think it sounds good on your voice. And this sometimes The effect of a cheap microphone on a voice where you want a real crunchy vocal sound could be much better than the most expensive microphone that you can buy.
A long way down to the sky, I'm floating around. The rain comes down and falls right through.
Yeah, that was a good take, guys. I really like that. The only problem with it is the fact that sometimes I get maybe a little bit too much of Jimmy. I think maybe if David and Richard could move in a little bit, I think it would be really cool. It's an omnidirectional mic, you know, and you can hear any shift in balance. You can get the balance yourselves around this one microphone. Hey guys, that was really good, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to punch in the last note. I think it was a little funny. Okay. So I'll play you the tape and we'll drop you right in.
Got it.
But it's a long way down, a long way down to the sky, I'm floating around. The rain comes down and falls right through.
Yeah, that's really good. You know what I'd like to do, guys? I'd like to try doubling this because I think it'll sound much more powerful. And I also think that we could sample this and fly it in and save your voices and save me a lot of time.
Yeah.
So let's try that. It's a really good idea in a project studio to have a microphone that is of superb quality. And this is a good example of one. It's omnidirectional, it's figure of 8, and it's cardioid. And it's well worth the extra bucks. And the reason I do that, Jimmy, when I kill the mute switch, I mean rather hit the mute switch, is that when I hit it, you hear the reverb hanging over, and you get to know.
Reverb's going to tape then.
Reverb's going to tape. We're doing the old-fashioned way. We're printing it.
Oh,
cool.
Money in the back. Right. I'll come in when the vocal comes in, maybe. Yeah.
Where are you going to come in? Where are you going to come in?
Right here.
My feeling is that the first part of the verse where the vocal enters, I think you should leave the keyboard out and come in the, what would be the C section.
Oh, just the C section?
C section right up to the chorus and then out.
So you're saying that
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So did you like the part that I played in the B section that time?
Wasn't that thrilled?
Ascending line.
Try it this time. Let's just see. We'll go back to the top, but don't play with the vocal enters.
You say I'm tired, but it's a long way down, a long way down to the sky. I'm floating around. The rain comes down and falls right through.
Let's try that again. I like the first two notes, but thereafter it seemed like you were sliding and putting a slight gliss, which it didn't really sort of fit.
Sure what I was doing?
Yeah. For some reason it felt funny. Let's just do it again. Can you give me a little bit more output, please, Jimmy?
Sure.
The amount of hiss that's in there is part of the tube driver thing?
Yeah. Try bringing my master down. Bring me up so I can hear the hiss. Okay, that doesn't affect it either, so.
Well, I can live with that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find it here, and I don't find. Okay, that thing seems to be the culprit. Okay.
Long way down to the sky.
Jimmy, what?
Sorry,
Yeah, long way down. You know, the thing he's doing about long way down, it might be nice if you could get something to make it suggest long way down, so maybe a descending line.
I could stay in the chord maybe and play like that. Let's try that.
Yeah.
tired, but it's a long way down. A long way down to the sky. I'm floating around. The rain comes down and falls right through. So far away from you. So far away. Why?
Can we fade me out there, maybe?
I play with fire.
You know what I mean?
That was great.
Yeah, that worked
That
good,
was
huh?
really cool. Quick playback.
Okay.
Come on over here and
Check it out.
check it out on the monitors.
You say I'm tired, but it's a long way down.
Now that we've recorded all our tracks for the song, it's ready to be mixed. As you've seen, we can do many different types of recording in this room, but the one thing we can't do is get a great big live drum sound. What's cool about our project studio is that you can take your tapes to a professional studio that's known for its drum ambience. And I'm going to show you some of my mic techniques for getting a basic live drum sound. Then we'll return to the project studio and do a mix of the song using the drum machine tracks.
Just checking, making sure that our drummer won't clobber the overhead mics with his drumsticks. We're at Fantasy Studios, big live room. We're going to record some live drums. As you know, at our project studio, all the drums were done from a drum machine. Pretty dry sounding and not very inspiring. Here, in this big space, we're going to get a killer live drum sound. This room that we're going to record the drums in is a reasonably live room, but not overly live. So what I've done is I've taken some steps to make it even liver. For instance, right over here on the drums, right underneath them, some plywood. A reflective surface, it helps the sound of the drums. These walls are semi-reflective. So what I've done is down the bottom end of the room, where I put my live room mics, I've increased the reflective surfaces. And one thing I've learned over the years is be inventive. Use whatever stuff is available to you, like this piano lid. I open it up all the way, more reflective surfaces. On my left over here is a Neumann 87. It's a room mic. It's, from our perspective, left, and there's another one on the right. That's our distant room mic. It's about 25 feet from the drums. Over here, we have our other room mic. This is a Neumann SM69. Stereo microphone, it's in XY. Now, one half of the capsule is going this way, and the other half of the stereo capsule is going that way. And when I combine that with our room mics at the very end of the room, it makes a great big fat sound. This is the centerpiece of my sound, the 3 Neumann U47 tubes. They're vintage, about 40 years old. They're tube, they get hot, but they sound great. Use them on vocals, use them on drums. You gotta be careful with them, they're awfully expensive. This funny little space over here, which looks like we've got microphone stands without mics on them, you might wonder what is going on here. Well, inside the bass drum, we have an AKG D112, but about 1.5 feet back out, we have a TLM 170. Be very careful. Do not face it directly towards the bass drum. You will blow the capsule out. Always angle it. Now, some bass drums have a necessary kind of low-frequency ring to it. You want to get hold of your money bag or your stone or your brick or something from the outside world and dump it in the bass drum. Now, I like to keep it away from the front skin because what you really want to put in there is a bit of mass. It tightens up the whole sound of the drum. On the other hand, you could also use the bag to get a little closer to the front skin. And that will shut down the sound some more too. Drummers don't usually like to play against it. It's a bit tight. But just putting the bag in there, or a stone or a brick or something, can really help tighten up the bass drum sound. And now to put the blanket, this packing blanket here, over the framework of these empty mic stands. And what that's going to do, hopefully, is to eliminate the sound of the drums leaking into that open TLM 170. You might want to also try gaffer taping this blanket to the drum head. Get your drummer's permission first, though. Let's have a look at the rest of the kit and see what mics we're using and what sort of angles and what sort of distance from the drums they are. On the hi-hat, we're using a KM84, angled roughly at about 40-odd degrees away from the drums and away from the openness of the hi-hat so you don't get any air blowing into it. On the snare, a 57, up in the air a little bit. You can get a little closer sometimes, a little bit more presence, but I like to get a bit of air gap between the snare and the skin. Underneath the snare, we got an AKG 452 with a little angle bracket on it. On the tom, we got a 421. Nice angle there, about 2 inches above the skin. And the same thing on the floor tom. A 421, about 3 fingers off the skin. You can see the angle. Drums, left, center, right. From a drummer's perspective, you know, people always ask me about John Bonham, how did you get that drum sound? First thing, John Bonham was an amazing drummer. He tuned his kit the way he tuned it, and only he sounded like John Bonham. And you could put any piece of crap mic on him, and it would still sound like him. One track that we did over at Stargroves, which was Mick Jagger's house, was in a big, huge room, similar in size to this, but it was all reflective. And all I needed was 3 mics, 2 overheads and a bass drum mic, and that was all she wrote. Now you figure it out. Dennis, play me a bass drum, please. What I'm doing with the bass drum, this is the D112 that's inside. I'm going to give it some EQ. And what I'm going to do is take out some of the lower mids, like we did in the Project Studio, but more radically, and some serious mids, upper mids and highs. And now I'm going to have a quick listen to the other bass drum mic. Sounds a bit dull and lifeless, so we'll give it the old lifeline switch. Once again, a little bit of low end, take out some lower mids, boost the mids, upper mids and highs, combine the two. Dennis, play a snare drum, bass drum, hi-hat figure, please. Always ask the drummer to do that. You know why? When he's just playing just the bass drum, he's never going to give you the full wally on the bass drum, as he's doing now. Okay, hold it. That's pretty good. Let's hear the snare, please. That's the 57, the ubiquitous 57. Bit dull sounding, isn't it? There you go, that's the old brightness that we really need. Underneath the snare, we have that AKG mic, the 452 with a little angle bracket. What I'm going to do with that is roll some of the bottom off. And I prepared a gate, a Drama gate. As you can hear, it chops off the end of the rattle of the snare. And you combine the two. El Massivo Snare Soundo. Hi-hat, please. I'm going to stick some EQ in. Once again, a quick roll off of the bottom end. Select your high frequency so it's not nasty. You know, pick the frequency that sounds best for your hi-hat. Don't copy me. Do it your own way. Right, Dennis, snare, bass drum, hi-hat. Okay, Dennis. Could you play the first rack tom, please? That's happening. And the floor, please. Okay. Let's deal with the left side of the drums, i.e. your left overhead. Cymbals. Okay, hang on a second. I've got to plug in my Pultec. Just a sec. Okay, go on in. That sounds really good. That's the left. Now let's hear the center one. Okay. I'll tell you what. Could you play a snare, bass drum, hi-hat, and then do a fill around the kit, then go to the rides and the crashes? And now we'll just listen to the room in general. Play some time, please. On this room mic, our stereo SM69, we don't really need too much in the way of EQ. I like the natural sound of the mic, so I've just put a little bit of top, a tiny bit of bottom on it. And because of the way it's positioned, it's picking up the entire response of the drum. As you can hear, you can almost get away with just this one stereo mic and maybe a little filler mic, because if you position your microphones correctly, 2 mics are almost better than 20. But we combine them. The whole trick about this is to combine the close and the distant miking. Now let's just have a listen when we check out the rest of the room. Now, that sound that you're hearing is just the 2 room mics, the bass drum mic, and the snare mic. And that's all you're hearing. It proves distance makes depth. Well, what I'm doing now is I'm setting up for a mix. We've got a bunch of music on tape. We've done bass, we've done drums, we've done acoustic guitars, we've done electric guitars, vocals, background vocals, keyboards, the kitchen sink.
Although there's no substitute for the kind of live drum sounds you just heard, I'm going to show you how to get a great mix using the drum machine tracks. So let's get started.
What I'm going to do is play the tape from the top and listen to the bass drum, but when we do that, we want to see if we can hear it first, because there's a little switch at the top of the console that says flip. And it flips it from the mic position into the tape position so we can actually hear what's coming back from the tape machine into the console. Next thing is a snare. Now, I've got a bunch of output gear that I plugged in on the last 8 channels.
An LXP1 left and right, and an SPX 990. The only difference with the SPX 990 is that we've done a little trick with it. It's not a normal SPX 990, which is a digital device. I've patched the auxiliary send out into an analog tape machine, which is in record. And the distance between the record head and the playback head creates a delay. And now we're sending the delayed signal to the SPX 990.
It's like trying to put warmth into the digital thing that we were talking about. This is putting the warmth of an analog tape machine into a digital reverb device. And we'll play some little games with that. We also have a PCM 70, left and right, and the H3 500, which is made by Eventide. Pretty sophisticated unit. So, let's have a listen and see what we can come up with for the snare. Well, there's our raw snare. Maybe we can sort of tart it up a bit, if you know what I mean. Hello, what's that? That sounds like magic. Hang on. Well, here's the snare going through the 3500. Now, that's an interesting program. Let's see what we can do with it. Holy mackerel, check the echo out, will ya? By reducing this decay time down to 1.3, 1 second. I like 0.5 seconds because this is not the kind of snare that I'd like to put in long reverb and echo, but you can do so many things with this device. Well, I think we've got the snare sounding pretty good and fat. Let's see what it sounds like together with the bass drum. Excellent. Let's bring in the rest of the kit. Now I'm going to mute the bass drum and the snare drum so I can listen carefully to the overheads, the crashes and the ride. You know, I think that could do with just a little bit of air on the top. And by that I mean some super high frequencies. Put the EQ in. Just the tiniest amount of 12K and the very, very tiniest amount, like 1 dB of about 15K, just to give it some air. That sounds pretty cool. Now I'm going to mute the drums because I want to listen to the bass. That's the next thing in the line. There's our famous DI. And our equally infamous bass amp. And together they sound like... And the reason, I'm going to stop tape for a second, the reason I like to have the DI separate from the bass amplifier so that I have control over 2 parts of the sound. The DI is very close, present, no ambience, and I can tweak all parts of the frequency. 1K to put, if you want to get the real picky sound out of the bass guitar up in the mix, and some super low down stuff, around about 80 cycles. Gives a lot of presence. But then on the other hand, when you mix the two together, if you put the amp up with that, which has got all the air and all the grunge and all the dirt, it sounds something like this. You can hear the tonality of the bass changing as I add in the DI and then I add in the bass amplifier. I like the sound of the amp because it's got a bit of hair around, and I want to hear the drums with that, and we just lift up the mutes. Now, what you'll notice here is that if I'm not careful, that the bass will eat up energy in the mix from the low end of the bass drum. So now I have to push the bass drum up higher to balance in with that. This brings us to a philosophy of mixing. You can't have 100% of everything. Balance it carefully. Here we go, listen to this. The idea of a good mix is to be able to hear everything at a low volume so that no matter what speaker you play on, it sounds balanced. The next part of our mix is the acoustic guitar. Delicate instrument. What the hell's it doing with a heavy rock band? Well, there's a way to project the acoustic guitar through the mix, still with a lot of presence, even though you have heavy crunchy guitars and heavy drums and heavy bass and a screaming vocal. The idea for that starts when you first record it. When we use the Ovation guitar, we use a DI, heavily compressed. We also use 2 acoustic guitar microphones as condensers, nice and bright, a lot of presence, and we compress that. And we send all of that to a chorus device. And what the overall effect of that is that in a low-level situation in the mix, you don't have to push it up too high in the mix for it to jump out of the speakers at you. What I'm doing in addition to here on the mix is I'm taking some of the super low end back out again, and I'm boosting other frequencies, i.e. round about 4K, 4,000 cycles per second, or 4 kilohertz. And I'm also reducing a little bit of that low mids, the 200 cycle range. And what that gives us is a little less boominess on the acoustic guitar, and it allows us not to take up as much space in the low end, and it's not competing with the bass guitar and the bass drum. Okay, at this point, your mix is starting to sound pretty decent. And it's a really good idea. Use a pencil or, one of these felt pens, permanent markers. As you notice on the board, I put a whole bunch of blue strips. I don't like to mark up my console with a bunch of grease pencils and pens which you can't get off afterwards. This little neat trick allows you to write marks in pencil, which you can do, and then erase afterwards once you've settled on a final mix. At this point, you can see some of my original marks, and now I'm going to put new ones because I've readjusted my mix. Some of them will stay the same, some of them will be different. These are new ones, and this is my new balance point. As you notice, the acoustic guitar is not high up in the mix, but yet you can still hear every single note of what it's playing. Now, with all the channels muted off, I'm going to bring up the electric guitars and see how we can slide those little beasts in. What we did with these guitar tracks when we first recorded them, we used a single microphone source. It's a mono track. It's very present. It's really up in your face. It's a Marshall amplifier. And it's already been EQ'd, and we placed the mic in the correct position. So you don't have to do too much afterwards. And as you can see, I'm doing very, very little to the EQ, a tiniest bit of upper mids, around between 4,000 and 5,000 cycles. And basically, that's it. I'm not even touching it. It's true that when we did record it, we also put a little bit of compression on too. So that in itself is also making the guitars speak to you at a lower volume, so you don't have to crunch them over in the mix. There's plenty of room for that. And we'll get to playing dynamic games with this later. Let's listen to what we've got on these 10 tracks so far. Okay, what seems to be apparent at this point is that the Telecaster and the SG, even if they're fairly high up in the mix, are not taking over everything. They're there for weight, for tone, and the acoustic guitar is, even though I've pulled it back 3 times now in the mix, you can still hear every single note. Now that we've got the rhythm section together as far as the electric guitars are concerned, let's have a listen and see what the solo sounds like. By itself. I've muted all the other channels except for the solo. Good guitar sound. I mean, I like the tone of it and everything, but I think we can make it sound a bit more interesting. Let's try put some of our delayed echo on there. And this sounds like it's in a concert hall, doesn't it? If you notice the machine's turning at pretty slow speed, that's 7.5 IPS. Now, if I'm going to wind back and play the solo again, I'm going to change speeds, and you'll hear the decay time change. Rather, the delay time will change. The decay time stays the same, but the apparent effect is that it is shorter. Not bad. I mean, it sounds good, but to my personal taste, I like the 7.5 better. It's warmer, it delays the notes a little longer, and it rounds the whole performance out. So let's switch it back to 7.5. And I think what I'm going to do now is play the whole track with the whole solo and the band in. Now let's have a listen to this. What I was trying to do there in that little bit of a mix with the guitar and its panning was to make it come alive a bit more. I like the feeling of being able to take a guitar and move it from side to side, following the beat of the music and following the flow of what the guitar player was doing. The panning of the guitar and placing it in the correct space in your mix is a real art, as it is with any instrument that you're trying to move around in the aural spectrum. It takes practice, and it takes a lot of careful listening. I like this idea of movement of sound. I like to try and paint a picture when I mix. When I hear a song for the very first time, what I try and do is I close my eyes and imagine what is it going to sound like in the final analysis, and I have a pretty clear picture from the very first time I hear a song as what it's going to be in the final product. You should practice that. Try it. Let's move on, and let's work on the vocal and see what we can come up with. I'm going to mute all the other channels, and let's just listen to the vocal.
Fill my veins, fill my lungs.
Yeah, that vocal sounds like it could do with a little bit of reverb on it. So let's give it the benefit of the doubt. We'll give him a little bit of the old analog sound to start with, and then we'll see if we can freak him out a little bit.
How they run. You say I'm tired, but it's a long way down.
Yeah, that's not bad, but that's not the whole story. Maybe we could give it a bit of a surprise. Maybe we'll spin him in the spin dryer and then put some reverb on him and make him come out sounding like Mickey Mouse, something like that. In this PCM 70, I've got a feedback loop of about 480 milliseconds, and it sounds something like this.
Long way down to the sky, I'm floating around the rain.
As you can hear, it sounds like he's repeating himself, and he's not burping. It's just the regeneration that's making him sound like he's singing the notes at the tail end of his vocal again and again, and it gives it a very pleasing effect. Now, with the whole band in, this is what we get.
And falls right through. So far away from you. So far away, wired.
And as you can hear at the very tail end of that, when I stopped the tape, you could hear his repeat echo just descending. Now, there's a little bit more in this mix that we've put on, and let's see if we could isolate the background vocals and the keyboards. They're only appearing in 2 places in the song. And let's just see what the background vocals will do for us. As you can hear from our background vocal guys chanting in the background there, bit noisy. We did it in the room here. The live speaker, the mic was in Omni. They wanted a little bit more volume, you see. They wanted to hear themselves a bit more other than their headphones. So, well, what can you do? So we threw the kitchen sink at them in terms of reverb and all kinds of stuff. The LXP1, the SPX 990, the PCM 70, the H3500. All kinds of goodies we threw at them to try and make them sound a little better. Let's see what that sounds like with the track.
To the sky, I'm floating around. The rain cools down and falls right through.
I think that'll work very nicely. Last thing we need to look at from an instrumentation point of view is the keyboard. Let's see what Mr. Waldo has given us. Very simple organ part, and I think it'll blend very nicely. But what we need to do, though, is to give it a little bit of the H3500, which makes it sound like it's in a bigger room. And then we have to add some of our famous analog delayed digital reverb device. And now let's wind this back and have a listen with the whole band in place.
To the sky, I'm floating around. The rain cools down and falls right through. So far away from you. So far away, wired.
Now that I'm about to start this mix, I know I'm going to screw up the first couple of times. There's a lot of cues. There's a count-off that has to be chopped off in the front. A couple of background vocal parts have to be switched on and off as we do the mix. Some of the contemporary consoles like this one have automation available in some form or another. It's not a bad idea. I don't want everybody out there to get too lazy. I want people to practice the art of switching things on and off. Don't rely on the computer. But I must admit, it is a kind of a neat function. Let's see if I can get through this mix without messing it up.
Calling out in the night, I'm going wild, going wild. Fill my veins, fill my lungs, and see how they run. You say I'm tired, but it's a long way down, a long way down to the sky. I'm floating around, the rain comes down and falls right through. So far away from you, so far away, wild. I play with fire, play with fire. Lift your head, close your eyes, and see what they've done. You say I'm tired, but I can't slow down. I can't slow down. In the end, I'm raging alone. I'm miles from home. I fall right through. So far away from you, so far away, wild. But it's a long way down, a long way down to the sky. I'm floating around, the rain comes down and falls right through. So far away from you, so far away, wild. So far away from you, so far away, wild. Play with fire. You say I'm tired,